She was barefoot, pregnant, and face to face with a wild black stallion no man dared approach. What happens when the most fragile person steps into the most dangerous place and doesn't flinch? Why did a 500 kilograms beast, untamed, feared, violent, stop dead in its tracks the moment she stepped forward? What pain was she hiding beneath her silence? And why did that horse seem to recognize it before anyone else? Stay with us until the final moment and witness a truth so raw, so unexpected, it may leave you breathless. This is not a tale of strength as we've been taught. It's the kind of strength that bleeds quietly, walks through fear, and changes everything without saying a word. The sun didn't just shine over Wild Haven. It pressed down like judgment. The kind of Texas heat that dried blood before it could sink into the dirt and made every step feel like a challenge from the earth itself. The wind, when it came, brought no comfort, only the scent of sweat, horses, and iron. From the top porch of the main house, Ethan Whitmore stood like a sculpture carved by wrath itself. 63 years old, tall and imposing, with skin leathered from decades of rule under open skies and a gaze as sharp as a branding iron. His white shirt, crisp despite the heat, clung to the memory of military precision. Every button in place, not one out of line, just like his empire. Down in the corral, chaos. A scream broke the dry silence, followed by the sickening sound of flesh hitting packed dirt. Dust rose, horses neighed in alarm, and a young cowboy, barely old enough to shave, crawled out from beneath the fence, his shirt torn, his pride obliterated. Ethan didn't move, not even a flinch. He watched, arms crossed, lips tight. In the center of the arena stood the beast, Midnight, coal black, eyes wild as fire in an oil drum, breath steaming from flared nostrils like a locomotive preparing to burn the world. A Mustang like no other, not just untamed, but untouchable. Scarred, massive, beautiful in the way that hurricanes are beautiful, because you're helpless against them. Ethan's voice came low, a death sentence disguised as a whisper. Inutile, all of you. The cowboys stood in a half circle, dusty hats in their hands, some bleeding, some limping, none speaking. Not after that. Midnight turned, paced like a lion in a cage far too small for his fury. He kicked the dirt, then raised his head toward Ethan, and for a split second, their eyes locked. It wasn't the stare of a man and an animal. It was war, and Midnight had never lost a battle. The old man turned to the cameras. Local press, a few national outlets, even one documentary crew from Austin. The challenge wasn't just spoken to the crowd in front of him. It was spoken to the entire country. $10 million. To the one who can ride him. The journalists laughed at first. One even asked if he was serious. Ethan didn't laugh. He never did. He took a sip of bourbon from a crystal tumbler and said, "I'm done watching boys pretend to be men. Let's see if any of them can prove they deserve the saddle." The news hit social media within minutes. A billionaire rancher offering 8 figures to anyone who could ride a demon horse in the middle of nowhere, Texas. It was too absurd not to go viral. Within 24 hours, they came. From rodeo champions in Nevada to ex-Navy SEALs from San Diego. Instagram cowboys with more followers than bones intact. Men with old injuries and young egos, carrying more ambition than wisdom. They lined up, signed waivers, and stepped into the ring, one by one. None lasted more than 8 seconds. Some didn't even touch the saddle before they were flying through the air like rag dolls. Broken wrists, dislocated shoulders, a fractured jaw. Midnight didn't just resist, he punished. And Ethan, he never left the porch. He watched, silent, calculating. For him, this wasn't about the horse. It was about something much older. Something deep in his chest that felt like control, or perhaps fear, masquerading as pride. But no one could tell. He gave nothing away. On the 6th day, one of the hands, a weathered man named Buck, muttered under his breath while icing his swollen ankle. "That horse ain't normal. He don't buck like he's wild. He bucks like he's remembering something." Ethan heard. He turned to Buck and said, "Memories are for the weak." But that night, As the lights shut down over the ranch and silence settled like dust on every surface, Ethan didn't sleep. He stood by the window, looking out toward the paddock where midnight paced in the moonlight. And for the first time in years, something flickered in his face. Not fear, not remorse, something colder, recognition. Because deep down, Ethan knew exactly what kind of beast Midnight was. And he knew why no man had been able to conquer him. Because Midnight was more than a horse. He was a reflection of everything Ethan had spent his life refusing to face. And someone was coming to shatter that reflection in a way he never saw coming. Someone who didn't come with ropes or boots or brute strength, but with bare feet, a swollen belly, and a voice that could stop monsters. But that was still a few days away, and Wildhaven was not ready, not even close. The dust hadn't even settled from the last fall when the cameras arrived. It started with one local news truck from Amarillo, then another. By noon, the front gates of Wildhaven were swarming with media vans, drones, and influencers desperate to capture the madness that was unfolding on the richest ranch in Texas. The kind of chaos that made the internet stop scrolling. But Ethan Whitmore stood calm amid it all, arms folded, face blank. In front of him, the corral simmered under the oppressive heat. Midnight was restless, more than usual. His hooves tore into the dirt as if it had offended him personally. His tail lashed, his ears twisted at every sound, every movement. There was no controlling him. Not with ropes, not with fences, not with brute force. Ethan walked out onto the main platform, a slightly elevated wood deck that overlooked the center of the ranch. Not built for comfort, but for control. Every camera turned to him. Reporters shoved microphones forward like weapons. His boots echoed against the wood as he approached the edge. When he stopped, the crowd fell into a hush. He didn't speak at first. He waited until the silence turned uncomfortable, until people squirmed and shifted, until all eyes were not on the Mustang, but on him. Then, one hand casually in his pocket, the other holding a glass of neat bourbon, he tilted his head just slightly and spoke with that drawl soaked in bourbon and venom. I'm offering $10 million, cash, to whoever can mount that animal and stay on long enough to hear their own heartbeat. Gasps, laughter, disbelief. But Ethan wasn't joking. Not even a hint of humor in his voice. Just iron. You heard me right. $10 million. You think you're a man? Come prove it. Let's see who's really made of grit. And who's just noise. A reporter from Dallas, trying to hide his tremble, raised a hand. Mr. Whitmore, why offer so much for a horse that clearly doesn't want to be ridden? Ethan didn't even blink. Because control ain't a luxury. It's a law. And if no one out here can tame that beast, then maybe we deserve what's coming. That was the moment everything changed. The challenge exploded across every major network within hours. Hashtag Tame Midnight began trending on Twitter. YouTube filled with slow-motion videos of the beast bucking grown men like toys. Podcasts dissected Ethan's ego, speculating on what the real prize was. News anchors debated whether this was performance art or the unraveling of a madman. But out in the Midwest, in farm towns forgotten by Wall Street, it meant something else. It meant hope, glory, a shot at rewriting one's life with a single ride. And people came, by the dozens, then hundreds. Professional rodeo champions with million-dollar belt buckles, washed-up stars from B-grade Western films, military veterans who hadn't felt alive since Afghanistan, TikTokers looking for clout, dads with nothing left to lose, sons trying to avenge their fathers, preachers, punks, and everything in between. They came dragging old saddles and younger dreams, each of them certain that they'd be the one to crack the legend. And Ethan, he watched it all unfold with the cold calculation of a general watching pawns walk willingly into war. He even built bleachers, started selling tickets, brought in food trucks, corporate sponsors, live stream deals. The Wildhaven Challenge became an event. No, a spectacle, with Midnight as the unwilling centerpiece and Ethan as its god. But something strange began to happen. The crowd didn't cheer when the men fell. They held their breath. They winced. They whispered. Because Midnight wasn't just throwing men off. He was breaking them. One man left in a stretcher with a fractured spine. Another had his arm stomped clean out of its socket. A third, a young kid from Missouri, just laid in the dirt, crying, whispering to no one. He looked into me, like he knew me. Even the toughest cowboys began hesitating before climbing the fence. But the cameras kept rolling. The live stream donations grew. The money doubled. And still, no one could stay on. In the evenings, Ethan sat on his porch, legs crossed, sipping aged whiskey. He never looked rattled, but his eyes were distant, haunted even, as if he knew that what he'd unleashed couldn't be undone. Because somewhere deep inside, he was starting to realize something that none of the cameras could capture. He wasn't just looking for a rider. He was looking for a reckoning. And it was coming, not with boots or spurs, but with bare feet and a lullaby. But nobody saw her coming. Not yet. Not through the dust. Not through the noise. But she was already on her way. And when she arrived, nothing and no one would be the same again. They came with swagger, with polished buckles, custom spurs, and names that echoed across rodeo arenas from Cheyenne to Vegas. Each one stepping through the gates of Wild Haven like they were stepping into destiny, blind to the truth that they were walking into something much darker. The makeshift arena had grown since the first days of the challenge. Ethan's crew build-up stands out of pine and steel. Rows of bleachers filled with ranchers, tourists, gamblers, and influencers holding phones instead of hats. Vendors shouted over the heat. Country songs blared over cheap speakers. Beer and bravado dripped from every corner. It looked like a fair, but in the center, it was war. Midnight stood still, too still, like a shadow carved from obsidian, not muscle. His body didn't twitch. His eyes didn't blink. He just stared, and every man who entered that ring thought the same foolish thing. I've seen worse. Then the gate opened. First came Bobby Dean, a two-time national champion with a drawl thick as molasses and a chin that had graced more Wrangler ads than he could count. He winked at the camera, flexed his biceps. Let's show this boy who runs the dust. 8 seconds. That's all he needed. He didn't last too. Midnight exploded under him like a mine, twisting, spinning, slamming his hose into the ground with such force that the wood beneath cracked. Bobby didn't fall. He was launched, like he'd been pulled by an invisible god straight out of the saddle. He hit the dirt shoulder first and didn't get up. Fractured collarbone. Crushed pride. Next was Ray Silverback Simmons, a monster of a man who claimed to have tamed bulls twice this size. His handshake could crush fruit. His smile had a bullet where a molar should have been. He laughed as he stepped into the ring. A horse is just a dog with legs. Show him who's boss. Midnight waited. Then Ray sat. And then, it was like watching a mountain slide off a cliff. Midnight didn't buck. He turned, sharply, violently. His flank twisted like a snake striking, and Ray was flung sideways. His boot caught in the stirrup for one terrible second before it tore free, and he landed, face first, just shy of the fence. He spat blood and dirt. He broke my damn rib, and my pride. But he was lucky. The next 3 weren't. One shattered his wrist on landing. Another dislocated a hip. The third, a quiet, soft-spoken ex-Army Ranger, didn't say a word after being thrown. Just stared at the ground for 10 minutes before walking away without looking back. And still, they kept coming. Because that's what pride does. It convinces you the fall won't be yours. By the 4th day, the bleachers weren't cheering. They were watching like it was a car crash. The crowd had stopped celebrating victories, because there were none. Only silence after impact. One girl, no older than 11, tugged on her father's sleeve after watching a man scream as his shoulder dislocated midair. "Daddy, why's the horse so angry?" The man didn't answer, but Ethan heard. From the porch, always watching. And that night, after the crowd left and the floodlights flickered out, Midnight remained in the ring, alone, walking in slow, deliberate circles. One of the ranch hands, Jimmy, a 19-year-old with more heart than sense, approached with a bucket of water. He didn't get within 20 feet. Midnight stopped, turned, locked eyes, and for a second, Jimmy swore he felt something reach into him. Not rage, not fear, something colder, like the horse was measuring him, looking past his bones, searching for weakness. Jimmy dropped the bucket and backed away. He never returned to the arena again. But the next morning, 3 new challengers arrived, and Midnight waited, not because he was tired, but because he wasn't, because he never was, and because someone was still missing from the game. She hadn't arrived yet, but when she did, everything that came before would look like practice. Because this wasn't a story about cowboys. It was about a woman the world forgot. And the moment she walked through those gates, barefoot and carrying more than pain, the beast would kneel, and the world would stop. But for now, the arena was just a graveyard of broken men, each one thinking they would be the one to conquer the unconquerable. Each one wrong. Because Midnight wasn't waiting to be broken. He was waiting to be understood. The dust on the long road into Wild Haven never settled. It was churned up daily now, by tires that had seen more states than miles per gallon, by boots worn thin at the heels, by dreams too heavy to be carried in silence. They came in waves. First came the loud ones, the self-filming daredevils with ring lights mounted to their dashboards and catchphrases rehearsed for TikTok. They came with cameras, sponsors, and brand deals, ready to turn a wild stallion into the next viral stunt. One even wore a shirt that read, "Saddle the Beast or Die Trying." Then came the drifters, ex-Marines with tattoos fading into sunburnt skin, one-eyed rodeo veterans in patched denim jackets, truckers who claimed to have broken wild Mustangs back when the government still paid cash for it, men who smelled like diesel, regret, and unfinished stories. There were gamblers too, of course, not just the ones betting on the riders, but the ones betting on themselves. Men deep in debt with Vegas still on their breath. A few didn't even bring saddles, just duct tape, ego, and desperate smiles. One man stepped out of a rust-colored Ford with a rosary around his neck and a flask in his pocket. This horse is going to give me fame or a funeral. Either way, it's better than yesterday. Another leaned against his trailer, strumming a broken banjo, eyes glassy. Ain't about money, brother. It's about meaning. That animal, he's got something I need to take back. The ranch was chaos by now. The entrance was lined with trailers like a makeshift county fair. Grills fired up. Boots pounded gravel. The scent of barbecue mixed with sweat and delusion. Ethan watched from the porch. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The show was writing itself. The fools kept arriving. Wild Haven had turned into a magnet for broken men, searching for proof they still mattered. They came thinking the horse was the test. But Midnight didn't play by their rules. He wasn't there to be beaten. He was there to reveal. And one by one, they were exposed. A former Hollywood stuntman swaggered through the crowd, gold aviators reflecting the sunlight. He had starred in a movie that won a technical Oscar in '09 and hadn't stopped talking about it since. All muscle, no mind. Just like the Mustangs we used to ride on set. You tame him with dominance. Just gotta let him know who's alpha. He lasted 6 seconds. When the EMTs were lifting him onto the stretcher, he cried out, "Cut! Cut! Where's my agent?" Another arrived in full cowboy cosplay, custom chaps, monogram boots, and a silver belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. Claimed he was a 6th-generation cattleman. Turned out he owned a vegan candle business in Phoenix. His foot caught in the stirrup, dragged 5 yards across the arena before they pulled the horse off. But it wasn't just the amateurs falling. Even the real ones, men who knew horses, they cracked. And something darker started happening. Some began hallucinating. They claimed the horse looked at them and saw something. Something private. Something buried. One man, a quiet, kind-looking middle-aged Texan named Dale, climbed out of his truck with a Bible under one arm and a photograph in the other. It was a picture of his daughter. She died last year. He didn't say how. He told the crew he wasn't there for the money. He lasted longer than most. 12 seconds. But when he fell, he didn't move. Not from pain, from grief. He knew, Dale muttered, trembling. That horse knew what I did. Nobody asked what he meant. They didn't want to know. Something had changed. Midnight wasn't just feared. He was respected, not like a challenge, like a priest, or an executioner. And yet, the crowds grew. The line at the front gate stretched longer by the day. People didn't come just to ride. They came to watch someone else fall, hoping they might understand themselves better by doing so. And still, Ethan watched. He saw men lie about their experience, their injuries, their fears. He saw some beg to try again, even with bones still healing. One man offered his Harley-Davidson as collateral for another shot. But no one saw her coming. She didn't arrive in a truck, didn't carry rope, gear, or backup. She walked, barefoot, bellied, alone. And by the time anyone realized she wasn't lost, it was already too late. The horse had seen her, and something shifted, not just in him, but in everything. The trailer didn't have a name. It had rust. It had bullet holes in the side that no one ever talked about, and a door that only closed if you kicked it twice and whispered something desperate. It sat on the edge of a forgotten stretch of Texas back road, half swallowed by weeds, surrounded by oil-stained dirt and aluminum cans that had been turned into ashtrays. Inside, Hope Walker was crouched in front of a cracked plastic basin, washing her only 2 shirts in rainwater she'd collected in a rotting cooler lid. The water was already brown, but she used it anyway. She hummed, softly, almost too low to hear, not to calm herself, but to keep from unraveling completely. She paused, one hand gripping the shirt, the other cradling the bottom of her swollen belly. Then came it again, the sharp pull. Not quite pain. Not yet, but not nothing either. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Stay calm, little one. Mama's still got time to fix this. She didn't speak in hope. She spoke in necessity, like a woman negotiating with time itself. Hope was 30, but looked 45. Sun-dried skin, chapped lips, eyes rimmed in sleepless red. Her hair, once copper blonde, was now a knot of faded streaks and grease. Her boots were long gone, sold for gas money weeks ago, and her feet were covered in cracked calluses that bled if she walked too far on gravel. The trailer smelled of mildew and baby powder. A cracked picture frame lay face down on the only table. She hadn't had the strength to look at it in weeks. Outside, the wind kicked up dust that slapped the metal sides like warning shots. She placed the shirt over the thin clothesline she had strung between 2 cabinet doors. It sagged like everything else around her. She stood too fast. The pressure in her lower back made her groan through her teeth. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Then she whispered it out loud, because keeping it inside would make it too real. I can't have you here. Not like this. Not in this metal box. The baby didn't respond, of course, but something shifted inside her, a flutter of movement. Not fear, not hunger, urgency. She moved to the back of the trailer, pulling out a duffel bag from under the cot. It was already half-packed. 3 cans of beans, a pair of socks, a child's blanket, once white, now the color of grief, and a faded map, creased and torn from months of folding and unfolding. The destination was circled in blue ink. Wild Haven Ranch. She didn't believe in fairy tales. She didn't believe in cowboys. But the story was everywhere now. A wild stallion. A man offering $10 million. A horse no one could tame. Hope didn't want the money. She wanted the silence to end. She wanted someone, somewhere, to see her. To know she existed. That she wasn't just a walking statistic, another shadowed face in a food pantry line. And something about that horse, that impossible, violent creature, called to something in her that had gone dry years ago. Maybe it was the violence. Maybe it was the fact that no man could get near it. Maybe it was because she'd spent her entire life being treated like something wild and disposable. And if anyone was going to break through to that animal, it would be someone just as broken. She reached under the cot again and pulled out a small tin box. Inside was all she had left. $17 in bills, so crumpled they looked like they'd been dug out of someone else's past. 3 coins. 1 photograph. The photo was of a woman, barefoot, holding a baby. smiling through cracked teeth. Hope's mother. She kissed the edge of the photo and tucked it deep inside her bag. Then came another pang, stronger this time. She winced and fell to one knee. Her breath came short, but she didn't scream. She just looked down at her belly. Not yet. Not until I find the horse. A knock on the trailer door startled her. It wasn't a knock, actually. Just the wind slamming a loose piece of siding. But her heart jumped anyway. Everything startled her now. She stood again, slowly. Her hand pressed her back. The sun was beginning to set outside, casting that angry, golden-red light across the land. The light that makes everything look like it's on fire. She closed the bag, slung it over her shoulder. No shoes, no plan, no backup. Just a name, a ranch, and a horse nobody could ride. She stepped out into the dirt, dust rising between her toes. She looked east, toward Wild Haven, toward something no one expected from her. And behind her, the trailer door creaked and shut on its own, as if even the place itself knew she wouldn't be coming back. Hope Walker walked away from the only shelter she'd known, swollen with life and empty of options. But she wasn't afraid anymore, because sometimes, when the world won't listen, you have to make it see. And nothing commands the world's attention like a woman who's already lost everything and still chooses to rise. The trailer didn't cool down at night. It just got darker. The Texas heat held on to everything: metal, fabric, skin, breath. And inside that rusted shell, Hope Walker lay on a cot no thicker than memory foam and no softer than guilt. She stared at the ceiling, a ceiling that sagged in the center like it had given up years ago. A single LED lantern flickered in the corner, its dying light casting faint shapes on the stained walls. From the outside, the trailer looked abandoned. From the inside, it looked like a lie someone kept repeating just to survive. Hope's bare legs were curled inward, knees almost touching her chin, one hand gripping the thin sheet that did nothing to stop the cold rising from the floor. The other hand rested gently on her belly, feeling every twitch, every turn. Then came the growl from her stomach, deep, hollow. She hadn't eaten all day. Yesterday had been a can of expired beans shared with a dog she never saw again. Tomorrow didn't exist yet. She refused to name it. A roach crawled across the ceiling, paused above her head, then disappeared into a crack. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she closed her eyes and did the only thing that still made sense. She sang, soft, so soft the sound barely reached the corners of the trailer. It wasn't the kind of song you find on radios or playlists. It was older than that. A lullaby passed down without melody, carried on the backs of mothers who'd never had much, but always had just enough. Her voice cracked, but the song didn't break. She sang to the belly beneath her hand, to the little heartbeat she couldn't see, but believed in harder than she believed in herself. If you're strong when you arrive, baby, everything I've lost will finally matter. Her voice caught her throat. She pressed her palm tighter to her belly, feeling movement, a roll, a push, the smallest rebellion. She smiled, but it didn't last, because the moment she stopped singing, silence reminded her where she was. Reminded her that the world outside that trailer didn't care whether her baby came into it warm or cold. It didn't care that she used to sing in church, used to draw portraits for tourists, used to believe people were mostly good. Now she had a choice: keep pretending the world would come save her, or get up and go break its damn rules. She sat up. The cot squeaked like it was warning her. Her body ached. Her ankles were swollen, her back screamed, and her hands shook as she reached for her duffel. She pulled it closer and unzipped it, quietly, like a thief trying not to wake the past. She reached inside and pulled out the one thing she never wanted her baby to see: a small plastic vial. Inside it, 3 white pills. The kind that stop labor. The kind you only take when you don't think you can make it. She stared at it for a long time. There had been nights she nearly took one. There had been nights she'd held it between her fingers like a coin, flipping fate in her mind. But tonight, with the song still echoing in her throat, and the baby still pressing against her from the inside like it was saying, "Don't you dare," she made her decision. She reached out and dropped the vial in the trash. Then she whispered to the belly, tears cutting tracks down her sunburned cheeks. "You win." The baby moved. Not much, but enough. And that was all she needed. She wiped her face on the sleeve of her shirt and pulled the threadbare blanket over her knees. She lay down again. The roach came back, watched her, and crawled away. Hope closed her eyes. And this time, when she sang, it was louder, more certain, like she wasn't just trying to put the baby to sleep anymore. She was waking herself up, because in the morning, she would walk. To the ranch, to the horse, to the man who thought the world still belonged to him. And somewhere between the dirt and the pain, she would show them all that even if the world breaks a woman into pieces, the pieces can still sing. And sometimes, that is what ends up breaking the world right back. The road was barely a road. It was a vein of dirt that split the earth open, stretched out endlessly, cracked and dry, with weeds that reached up like they were begging for rain that never came. And down that road walked Hope Walker. No shoes, no water, 9 months pregnant, carrying a bag with one hand and holding her stomach with the other like it might fall apart if she didn't. Her breathing was short, ragged, the kind of breathing that doesn't ask for help because it knows none is coming, the kind that survives out of sheer spite. The sun was merciless. No clouds, no wind, just a white-hot fire eating the sky and pressing its weight onto everything beneath it. Her shadow followed her, long and trembling behind her, like even it didn't want to walk this far. She stopped, only for a moment, bent over, hands on her knees, the pressure in her lower back pulsing like a warning siren. The bag slid from her shoulder. She looked down at her feet, caked in dust and blood, skin splitting in thin red lines across the heels. Toenails cracked. She couldn't remember when she'd last felt grass, or a tile floor, or anything soft beneath her soles. But she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she straightened her back and whispered to the life inside her, voice thick with heat and grit. "Every step, baby, every step is for you. Only for you." She picked up the bag, walked again. The ranch was still nowhere in sight. Just more dust, more heat, more Texas. A pickup truck passed on the opposite side, slowed down. The man behind the wheel, white beard, mirror glasses, sunburned arm hanging out the window, looked her over, paused, then drove on. She didn't wave, didn't yell. She'd learned what happened when you asked the wrong people for help. 30 minutes later, she stopped again. This time not because of the pain, but because something shiny caught her eye on the side of the road. A boot, just one, size 11, sun-bleached, torn at the heel. Probably tossed from a moving truck, forgotten by someone chasing a new life or fleeing an old one. She picked it up, turned it in her hand. It wasn't going to help her, but something about it made her laugh. Not a sweet laugh, the kind of laugh that scares you a little, because it's too dry, too sharp, too close to breaking. She kept it, tied it to her bag with a piece of string, and moved on. The next mile was worse. Her thighs burned. Her skin began to peel at the shoulders. Sweat soaked through her clothes, and her vision blurred at the edges like she was underwater. Then came the pickup again. Same one. This time it stopped. He got out, didn't come close, just stood by the open door and said, "You all right, lady?" She didn't answer. He tried again. "You need a ride?" You headed out toward Wild Haven. Her eyes narrowed. That name. He knew. Everyone knew now. She took a slow step back. The man raised both hands, palms out. "Hey, easy. Ain't here to mess with you. Just figured that baby looks about ready. And the ranch is still a good ways up." She studied him. Something in her gut twisted. He had that look. The kind of man who helps you just enough to make himself feel like God. The kind who says, "You're lucky I stopped," and means it. She shook her head. "I'm fine." He smirked. "Suit yourself." He got back in, drove off, kicked dust in her face on the way out. But the smirk stayed with her. Not because it was cruel, because it was familiar, because she'd seen it before, in a different face a long time ago, in the face of the man who called himself her stepfather, the one who said love and control were the same thing. She kept walking, but her chest felt heavier than her belly now. Another mile, then another. Eventually, the land started to change. The road widened. The grass came back in patches, and in the distance, barely visible in the rippling heat, a black dot began to grow. It wasn't a ranch yet, but it was something. A fence, a sign, maybe a marker. Her legs gave once. Just once. She fell to her knees, caught herself on her elbows, grit in her teeth. She screamed, not from pain, from rage. Then she punched the ground, one fist, then another. You will not be born in the dirt. She stood, slow, 1 inch at a time, a statue built from nothing but bone and rage and mother blood. She looked toward the black dot ahead, wiped her mouth, and walked, because if the world wanted to see what strength looked like, it could start here, with a woman bleeding from her heels and humming lullabies through cracked lips, with a baby who refused to wait, with the silence that followed her like a dare, and with the storm that would begin the moment she stepped through Wild Haven's gate, barefoot, alone, but never again unseen. The gate to Wild Haven was made of wrought iron and Texas arrogance, big enough for cattle trucks, bold enough to say you don't belong unless you're expected. Hope stood in front of it like a ghost who hadn't realized she was dead yet. Her dress, once pale blue, was soaked through with sweat, clinging to her legs and belly like second skin. Her hair, damp, knotted, wild, stuck to her forehead in uneven streaks. She was barefoot, sunburned, and trembling. One hand rested on the top of her belly. The other dangled limp at her side, the weight of her duffel bag digging red lines into her shoulder. The gate didn't creak. It didn't open. But the voices came. A cluster of ranch hands leaned against the fence line 20 yards off. Dirty jeans, crooked hats, cigarettes dangling from lazy lips. They hadn't noticed her approach. Not until she stopped right in front of the property. Not until she refused to flinch. Then they laughed. The kind of laugh that men make when they're scared but too dumb to admit it. When the rules of the world suddenly shift, and the only weapon left is mockery. Ma'am, you a bit off course? One of them, a wiry guy with a cowboy mustache that didn't match his baby face, squinted at her. Thought this was Wild Haven, not the maternity ward. More laughter. Spit hit the dirt. Another guy added, "You sure this ain't a trick? Like maybe she's hiding a saddle under that dress?" Hope didn't answer. Her breath was short, her lips dry. She could taste iron, but she didn't step back. That silence made them uncomfortable. One of them, older, broader shoulders, maybe the foreman, pushed off the post and walked up a few steps closer. He didn't smile. He wasn't joking. He looked like a man who'd buried wives and horses and couldn't tell the difference anymore. "Lady, no offense, but you're not supposed to be here. This ain't a place for folks in your condition." He glanced at her belly like it was an offense, like it was a problem she had failed to solve before arrival. Hope finally spoke. Not loud, not soft, just sure. "I heard there's a horse here no man can ride." The silence cracked, just a little. The baby-faced one snorted. "And what? You gonna breastfeed it into submission?" That one made them all laugh harder. But the older man didn't. He kept staring at her. Something in his eyes had shifted. Something he didn't want to admit. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. Hope reached in her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. A printout from a flyer someone left at a gas station. It had a photo of Midnight in full rear, hose high, mouth open like he was screaming at God. At the bottom, bold letters read, $10 million, if you dare. She held it up with one hand. It shook, but only from exhaustion. "I'm here for the dare." More silence. Then, "Lady, this ain't a joke. That horse has sent men to the ER. He's cracked ribs, split skulls, paralyzed a kid from Utah last week." Hope blinked slowly. "Then maybe he'll recognize me." The older man took off his hat, ran a hand through thinning gray hair. He looked down the road behind her, as if expecting someone else to appear. Someone sane, someone male, someone capable. No one came. He turned back. "Look, I could call someone. There's a shelter about 15 miles up. They got AC. A nurse. You look like you're close. Ain't safe out here." Hope stepped forward. Just one step. The kind that changes things. Her voice dropped into something harder. "I didn't walk all this way for shade and sympathy." The foreman studied her, then did something no one expected. He opened the gate. Didn't invite her in. Didn't welcome her. Just opened it. Slow. like she might be a fire he didn't want to touch but couldn't stop watching. She walked through without hesitation. No applause, no music, just boots scraping dirt behind her and whispers starting to rise. She ain't gonna make it. This is gonna get ugly. Ethan's gonna lose it. One voice cut through all the others. Low, mean, disgusted. This ain't a place for women, especially broken ones. Hope stopped, turned her head slightly, then smiled. The kind of smile that's closer to a warning than a welcome. That's exactly why I'm here. And then she kept walking, past the men, past the horses, past the history they try to keep closed behind those gates. Because when you spend your whole life being told you're not enough, one step through the door is revolution. And today, Hope Walker wasn't here to ask permission. She was here to make them remember what real fear looks like. Not from a stallion, from a mother. The porch at Wildhaven wasn't just where Ethan Whitmore drank. It was where he judged. Polished cedar, worn-in rocking chair older than half his staff. A Texas flag faded to pale denim flapping behind him. From that perch, Ethan had watched empires collapse. Marriages, partnerships, entire bloodlines, and all without standing up. He sat with his legs crossed, boot tapping the wood to a slow, invisible rhythm. In his hand, a heavy crystal tumbler filled with 2 fingers of Blanton's over one thick cube of ice. Because anything more was weak, and anything less was showy. He didn't blink much. Didn't need to. Ethan Whitmore had trained himself out of blinking decades ago. In boardrooms, courtrooms, funeral homes. You learn not to flinch when you spend your life owning things that can suffer. From this angle, he had a perfect view of the southern paddock, where midnight was pacing again, black, restless, furious. That horse never stopped moving, just like Ethan's thoughts. That's when he saw her. The girl. No, the woman. Dragging herself across the compound like a dust-stained ghost, shoulders curled inward, belly round, and pulling her body forward like a weight tied to her spine. She didn't walk like a lost woman. She walked like she knew exactly where the pain was coming from, and was heading straight toward it anyway. Ethan watched her pause at the center of the main yard, one hand gripping the iron fencing to stay upright. He took a sip of his drink. The ice cracked. Then came the voice of one of the cowboys, distant, panicked, juvenile. Boss, she's a skin to ride him. The black one. Ethan leaned back, let the chair creak under him. Didn't look shocked. Didn't even chuckle at first. Then, like a slow ignition in his chest, a low rumble escaped his throat. A laugh. Not one of joy, but the kind of laugh that came from seeing something so ridiculous, so deeply misplaced, that your body reacted before your brain did. He tilted his head, eyes fixed on the woman. She's 9 months pregnant and barefoot. What's she gonna do? Birth the baby on the saddle and have it finish the ride. Another sip, another tap of the boot. The cowboy hesitated. She says she ain't here for the money. Says she wants to talk to the horse. Now Ethan did laugh. This time louder. Talk to it. He stood. Finally. Stepped off the porch slowly, like gravity didn't quite apply to him. He walked across the gravel with a kind of deliberate calm that made grown men nervous. Hope didn't move. She just waited. They met near the corral. Ethan stopped a few feet away, adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, eyes drifting from her face to her feet, caked in blood and grit. You look like a ghost someone forgot to bury. No response. He smiled. You want the money, girl? Fine. Try your luck. But don't expect flowers at your funeral. She finally spoke. I'm not here to die. Her voice was hoarse, broken around the edges, but steady. Ethan's smile thinned. Then what the hell are you here for? Hope looked past him, past the noise, straight at midnight. Now standing still for the first time in hours. I'm here for him. Ethan followed her gaze, and for the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes. A recognition, or maybe a warning. But it passed. He laughed again. One dry, bitter note. Sweetheart. He gestured toward the horse. That monster doesn't listen. He doesn't yield. He doesn't feel. He destroys. Hope's eyes didn't leave midnight. That's exactly why he's mine. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think this is a fairy tale? You think because you've suffered, the world owes you a miracle? Hope finally turned her gaze to him and said something that landed like a knife behind his ribs. "No, I think because I've suffered, I see things you're too rich to feel." She stepped past him, didn't ask for permission, didn't flinch when he didn't stop her. As she walked toward the gate, Ethan stayed rooted to the gravel, silent, still. The ice in his glass had melted. The laughter had gone dry. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore wasn't sure if he was watching the fall of a madwoman or the beginning of his own. No music, no crowd, no commentary, just the wind scraping across the dirt like it was trying to warn someone too stubborn to listen. The corral was empty now. The bleachers had quieted. Even the cowboys, who'd spent the last week swapping insults and war stories, leaned forward on the rails like boys at a funeral who didn't understand what death meant, only that it was standing right in front of them. The dust spun in lazy spirals. The air was heavy with heat, but no one fanned themselves. No one moved. No one even blinked. Hope Walker stood just outside the gate, barefoot, belly forward, head high. Every breath she took looked like it cost her something. Sweat lined her hairline, soaked in her collar, traced lines down her spine. Her hands hung loose by her sides, fingers twitching once, maybe from nerves, maybe from instinct. She looked small in that open space, like something the world had already tried to forget. But she wasn't shrinking. She was gathering. Ethan stood 20 feet back, arms crossed, drink untouched. He said nothing now, not even a taunt, because part of him, a part he'd buried under years of steel and whiskey, knew this wasn't a game anymore. She stepped forward, one foot into the arena, then another. The gate behind her closed with a click that sounded too final for comfort. Midnight hadn't been brought in yet. They wanted her in first, as if the ranch itself needed a moment to adjust to what it was about to witness. And still, silence. Even the horses in the distance had stopped moving. No whinnies, no shifting hooves, just dust and breath and the low creak of wood in the heat. She walked to the center of the corral, didn't turn to the crowd, didn't wave, didn't perform. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, the men watching, the ones who'd called her insane, pathetic, delusional, began to question whether they were the ones out of place. She stood with both hands resting on the swell of her stomach, head tilted upward, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. And maybe she was. Maybe when you lose everything, your senses sharpen around the things that still matter. Maybe the silence wasn't empty at all. Maybe it was waiting. Then the side gate opened. Not loudly, not with drama, just slow, deliberate. And out came Midnight, a shadow with hooves. His body was coiled tension, eyes black as oil, shoulders thick with power, mane wild and tangled. His steps weren't rushed, but they carried the weight of something ancient, something not meant to be inside fences. He didn't charge. He didn't rear. He looked straight at her, and Hope smiled. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just waited. The crowd held their breath, as if one gust of wind could snap this thread of fragile stillness. A bead of sweat rolled down Hope's temple. Her feet shifted barely. Midnight's ears twitched. He tilted his head, a predator confused by the lack of fear. 2 lives, 2 traumas, 2 storms that had finally met in the eye of something no one could name. And then, without a single cue, without a whip, without a sound, Midnight took one step toward her. Just one, but it was enough to make the whole ranch forget how to breathe. And in that silence, not cruel, not calm, but charged, Hope finally opened her mouth. But she didn't speak. She sang, not loud, not pretty, not for them, for him. And the sound was so soft, so broken, so raw, that the stallion lowered his head. One step, then another, and the world, as it had been, began to fracture, not with thunder, but with silence. The metal gate groaned as it swung open, just wide enough for her to pass. Dust clung to the hem of her dress. Her belly shifted slightly as she inhaled, steadying herself, one hand resting protectively on her side. The baby inside kicked, once firmly, as if echoing her determination. A silent agreement between mother and child. We go forward. The arena was a scorched bowl of dirt under a pale Texas sky, not a cloud in sight. The boards were cracked from years of sun and impact. The scent of dry earth and tension hung in the air like the moment before a rifle is cocked. Midnight was already there, a beast carved for muscle and fire. He didn't pace. He didn't flinch. He just watched. His eyes, wide, black, and alert, tracked her every step like she was prey. His tail flicked once, and a puff of dust rose behind him. She didn't look like she belonged. Not to them. A barefoot pregnant woman walking into a space where seasoned cowboys had been thrown like rag dolls. It should have been laughable, but no one laughed. Not after what they'd seen the day before. Not after he followed her with his gaze like a soldier recognizes an enemy that deserves respect. She stopped just inside the arena, the gate shutting behind her with a low clank. Her lips parted. It's just you and me now. No theatrics. No dramatic tone. Just a truth spoken plainly. Midnight's ears twitched. His massive chest expanded as he breathed her in, nostrils flaring. One of the stable hands up in the bleachers leaned toward another and muttered, "She's gonna get herself killed." But the other man didn't respond. He was staring, just staring, as if, deep down, something in him had shifted. Something ancient, something scared. Hope took another step, then another. She didn't hold out her hand. She didn't try to speak again. She just walked, slow, deliberate, until there was nothing but 5 feet of charged air between them. Midnight's hoof pawed to the ground, his ears pinned back. One wrong move, and he'd lunge. Everyone watching knew it. You could feel it like static in your teeth. But Hope didn't flinch. She dropped to one knee. Dust coated her leg. Sweat dripped from her jaw. She bowed her head, not in fear, but in something stranger, almost recognition. Midnight snorted, took one step forward, then another, and then he stopped. So close now, she could feel his breath on her neck. Heavy, wild. Then he did something no one expected. He lowered his head and waited. Gasps echoed across the ranch. Someone dropped a coffee mug. It shattered, but no one turned to look. Hope lifted her head slowly, their eyes meeting. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. Instead, she raised her hand, but not to touch him, to offer it. Open, empty, letting him choose. And Midnight, this animal no man could break, no whip could tame, stepped forward and placed his muzzle gently in her palm. Silence fractured. Emotion cracked the lungs of men who thought they'd seen everything. Ethan dropped his glass, the whiskey splashing unnoticed on the floorboards of the porch. He didn't speak, couldn't, because in that arena, beneath a sun that showed no mercy, something impossible had happened. Not with force, not with fear, not with dominance, but with presence, with pain and power, and the quiet defiance of a woman who had already lost everything, yet walked barefoot into the lion's den and changed the rules. And just when the ranch thought it understood what had happened, Midnight knelt. The ground vibrated. A collective breath held, and Hope stood in front of him, still and steady, her hand resting on the beast's bowed neck. Then the crowd noticed something even more shocking. The brand on Midnight's flank. It had been altered, burned over, scarred, as if someone long ago had tried to erase who he was and failed. And now he stood beside someone who didn't try to own him, only see him, and that was more powerful than anything they'd ever known. The arena was frozen, not by ice or fear, but by something heavier, expectation, the type of silence that doesn't ask for attention, but demands it. Cowboys who'd mocked her minutes ago now sat rigid on the fence, afraid even to breathe. Ethan stood with a half-lit cigar between his fingers, forgotten. It burned low, flickering like it too wanted to witness what happened next. Hope didn't move fast. She stood there, dust on her legs, sweat tracing the edge of her jawline, the soft curve of her belly rising with every breath. Midnight hadn't backed away, but he hadn't come closer either. He was watching again. His nostrils flared, his ears pivoted, seeking any break in the stillness. She could have tried to touch him, could have spoken, given commands, like every man before her had. But she didn't. She sang, soft, unshaken. Her voice cracked slightly on the first line. Not from fear, but from emotion too old to cry and too deep to bury. Sleep, my little boy. The world can wait. The stars will guard you, while the dark stays away. Some of the men squinted, confused. Others blinked slowly, as if something inside them recognized the tune before their minds caught up. It wasn't a song for horses. It wasn't a song for men. It was for the child. Her child. The one she had carried across cities. Across shame. Across pain no one in that ranch could name. But every soul could feel. Midnight twitched, not in warning, in memory. He turned his head slightly, his eyes losing their hardness. A low breath left him, not aggression, but something else. Stillness again. Sleep, my baby, still. Mama's got no gold or land, but she's got arms, and she's got time, and a heart that understands. Her voice got stronger, not louder, stronger, like something had opened inside her, like the song had stopped being a lullaby and turned into a lifeline. For the horse, for the men watching, for herself. Then came the impossible. Midnight stepped forward. Once, twice. He lowered his head, not fast, but slow, deliberate, until his brow nearly touched the dirt. The breath that left his lungs came with a sound so deep it rattled the metal fence. And Hope, she kept singing. The cowboys looked at each other, wordless. The oldest among them, Tommy Jacks, a man who'd worked cattle since before the Vietnam War, rubbed a shaking hand over his chest. No one noticed the tear he wiped away, except the youngest able hand who stood frozen beside him, trying to understand why his heart was racing so fast. Ethan, he leaned against the post, arms crossed, trying to act indifferent, but his knuckles were white, because he knew that lullaby. He'd heard before, not in this town, not on this ranch, but in a hospital room in Austin 16 years ago. The same day a woman, one he had loved but couldn't own, lost their child before it was born. A woman who used to sing, even when her body was breaking. A woman who left him and never returned. And in that moment, Ethan knew something else. Hope wasn't just some drifter. She was connected, not by blood maybe, but by something more dangerous. Truth and memory. And maybe, just maybe, by that unborn child she'd lost all those years ago. Because what no one knew, what not even Hope herself had realized, was that the lullaby she sang, it wasn't hers. It came from somewhere deep inside, passed on, forgotten, and now returned. Midnight exhaled again and lay down beside her. Not submissive, not broken, but safe. The kind of surrender that only comes from trust. Hope stopped singing. She looked up at the men, at their shocked, reverent faces. And then, finally, her voice cut the silence one last time. He's not the monster. You are when you stop believing people can change. The gate behind her creaked open again, but no one dared move. Because for the first time since the ranch was built, they weren't sure who held the real power anymore. The sound of breathing was all that remained. Not from the crowd. Not anymore. Every soul that stood by the fence, every pair of boots planted in the dust, every hand that once clenched in mockery or doubt, was now still. Even the wind, that relentless companion of dry land, had stopped. But inside the arena, a different rhythm had taken over. Heavy, steady, intentional. Midnight's hooves sank into the dirt like thunder softened by time. His black coat gleamed under the afternoon sun, slick with sweat and streaked with streaks of earth. Every step he took kicked up a swirl of dust. Slow motion ghosts spinning around his legs like smoke around a battlefield survivor. Hope didn't flinch. She stood like a statue carved by something ancient. Her eyes locked with the beast, her hand still by her side. Not reaching, not retreating. Just waiting. Not for safety, not for recognition, but for truth. Her dress clung to her belly, her cheeks flushed red with heat, but she didn't wipe her brow. Even the baby, somehow, was silent, as if he, too, understood the gravity of the moment. Midnight came closer. One step, another. Each hoof fall was a drumbeat cracking through a history of pain. His, hers, and the invisible line that connected them both. To the crowd, it looked like a miracle. To Ethan Whitmore, watching from the porch with a whiskey glass frozen in his grip, it looked like defiance. A slow unraveling of the power he had wielded for decades, now slipping like water through his fingers. He stepped down from the porch, but didn't move forward. He couldn't. Something about the way that woman stood, about that horse, felt familiar. Too familiar. Then Midnight did something no one expected. He stopped, mere inches from her, and dipped his head. Not low like submission, not fearful. It was measured, deliberate. A motion that said, "I see you." Hope raised her hand, just slightly. Not enough to startle, just enough to be seen. Her fingers hovered near his face, trembling only because her muscles were exhausted. Not from fear, but from holding back every single thing she'd ever want to scream. The crowd's breath hitched in unison. Then the beast, a creature that had trampled men, broken bones, split fences like paper, closed his eyes, and pressed his muzzle softly into her palm. Someone dropped their hat. Another man swore under his breath, crossing himself like he'd just seen resurrection in real time. But Hope wasn't smiling. She wasn't weeping either. Her eyes stayed open, wide, searching deeper. And then a flicker of confusion crossed her face, because under Midnight's fur, just above the eye, was a faint white scar. Tiny, curved, familiar. Her breath caught. Her fingers traced it like she'd done before, long ago. No one else noticed. No one else could. But in that second, Hope remembered a horse from her teenage years. A young Mustang, saved from slaughter by a quiet stable hand with too much heart and not enough money. A horse that had vanished after a fire. Burned stables, dead cattle, no survivors. She'd cried for days, cursed the world, mourned a bond she never thought she'd feel again. But now her knees buckled, because Midnight was that horse. The scar, the eye, the slight dent in the left ear where he'd been caught on wire. It was him. He hadn't died. He'd been sold to Ethan Whitmore. And in that instant, everything collapsed. Not the dust, not the silence. Her world. The man who'd bought him was the same man who had paid her father to burn their own ranch for insurance. The same man who'd stolen more than land. He had stolen family, memory, hope. The horse pressed closer to her, a low sound rumbling from his chest. And suddenly, everything made sense. Ethan had known who she was the moment she stepped onto his land. That's why he laughed. That's why he tried to humiliate her. Not because he didn't believe she could tame Midnight, but because deep down, he feared she might. That she might remember. That she might reclaim what he thought was buried under ash and time. The gate behind her slammed shut. Not by wind, by Ethan. Hope turned. Midnight didn't move. Ethan's voice was different now, raw, splintered. "You weren't supposed to come back." Her eyes burned. She stepped in front of the horse, between him and the man who had ruined everything. And her voice, calm, controlled, deadly. "No, I was never supposed to leave." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just stood there, caught in the collision of past and present, watching as the truth surfaced like bones from shallow dirt. Midnight didn't need saddle. Hope didn't need permission. And Ethan, he finally understood what it felt like to lose something that was never his to begin with. A hush fell over the ranch that no preacher, no threat, and no gunshot ever could have inspired. Not like this. Midnight stood before her, motionless, breathing deeply. Steam rolled from his nostrils. His chest heaved, rising and falling like a wave, trying to remember how to crash, but never quite breaking. There was no command, no halter, no rope. Just instinct and something else no one could name. Hope didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood there, cracked boots half buried in dust, her hands relaxed by her side. Sweat clung to her collarbones. Her cheeks were flushed from sun and tension. But her eyes? Calm, steady, watching him. Not as a beast, not as an enemy, but as something she'd known before words ever mattered. Then it happened. Midnight, this wild, undefeated creature that had flung men across fences and dragged professionals like scarecrows, leaned forward. His muscles twitched, not from fear, but restraint. And gently, he lowered his massive head, and touched her belly with the tip of his muzzle. The world stopped. Not metaphorically. Literally. No breath. No movement. Just the sound of that contact. Fur on cotton. Life on life. Gasps rose from the watchers, scattered and involuntary. Even hardened cowboys who'd spent years breaking animals stiffened, their lips parting, unable to process what they were witnessing. A horse recognizing a child, not yet born. It went against everything they understood, everything they trusted. Hope blinked once. Then again, her hand moved slowly to her stomach, resting above his nose. Her lips parted. He knows. The words weren't for anyone but herself. But the crowd heard them. Clear, raw, vulnerable. One man dropped his hat. Another turned away, not in disbelief, but shame, like he'd just seen proof of something sacred and realized he'd mocked it hours before. Ethan stood rigid, jaw locked, eyes burning into the scene like he could will it into something less impossible. But he couldn't, because the Mustang wasn't just reacting to a sound, or smell, or cue. There was no trick, no training. Midnight was doing something no one could explain. Not even the scientists Ethan once hired to study animal cognition for his failed genetics venture. This wasn't data. This was connection. A bond not forged in force or expectation. It was like recognition. And that's when the real shift occurred. Because suddenly Hope's face changed. Something passed behind her eyes, like a light flickering in a hallway long abandoned. And she pulled her shirt slightly to the side, just enough to expose the faint tattoo on her lower belly. A simple outline. A Mustang. The exact same curve, shape, and posture of the horse standing before her. It had been there for years. A memorial to the one horse she'd ever loved and lost. Her voice cracked. Midnight isn't his name, she said softly. The words caught like fire in the wind. His name is Ranger. Dead silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a space, but replaces air. And Ethan? He flinched. Hope turned to face him fully now, standing taller than ever before. Her face wasn't angry. It was truth incarnate. You took him from me when I was 17, she said. After the fire you paid for. After my father disappeared. Ethan's face drained of color. A tremble ran through the crowd like an invisible storm front. Ranger was mine, she continued. He was mine before you bought him out of the wreckage. Before you rebranded him. Before you broke him trying to make him forget. Her eyes narrowed, cutting through decades. But you didn't break him. You just buried him, same as you tried to do with me. Then the baby kicked. A soft, sudden movement under her hand. Midnight lifted his head, ears forward, as if he'd felt it too. Another gasp, and then, from the back of the crowd, a voice. Cracked, old, familiar. That horse, the voice rasped, was saved once before, by a girl who sang him to sleep during the worst storm we'd ever seen. An old ranch hand stepped forward, Jed Foster, retired, nearly blind in one eye. He pointed at Hope, hand shaking. She ain't just some drifter. That's Hope Bennett, daughter of Henry Bennett. Whispers exploded. People turned, connecting dots they didn't even know existed. And Ethan, he finally stepped forward. His lips twitched like he was going to speak, maybe deny it, maybe confess. But before a sound escaped, Midnight reared slightly, just enough to force Ethan to freeze. Not a threat, a warning. Hope stepped forward, calm and certain. I didn't come here to fight you, she said. I came here to show him something real again. And maybe remind a few people around here what courage actually looks like. Midnight, no, Ranger, stood beside her like he'd never left. And now, the story wasn't just about a woman and a horse anymore. It was about truth reclaimed. It was about the invisible threads people pretend don't exist, until something tugs on them hard enough to unravel an empire built on lies. And as the ranchers, the workers, even the ones who once mocked her watch her walk away with Ranger and that unborn child, they felt something new rise in their chests. Not fear, not awe, but respect. Because what they saw wasn't a trick. It wasn't a miracle. It was justice wrapped in the simplest, most disarming form. A touch. The air had thickened, not with heat or dust, but with disbelief. Tom didn't feel real anymore. It felt like something had cracked open in the middle of that ranch, something no one had the courage to name. Hope stood beside the black Mustang, her boots unmoving in the reddish dirt. The wind had stopped. Even the sun seemed to hover in place, casting a sharp, golden light across the curve of her back and the glistening muscle of the stallion beside her. Midnight. No, Ranger had lowered his head again, nudging her shoulder once, then standing still, like he was asking something silently, something only she could hear. And then, Hope did what no man in that ranch, or any other, had dared to dream was possible. She stepped up. No saddle, no bridle, no rope. She placed one hand on Ranger's mane, the other on his withers, and with a single fluid movement, no grunt, no rush, no command, she swung her leg over and sat. The entire ranch held its breath. She was mounted, bareback, on a beast that had hospitalized grown men. Ranger didn't flinch, didn't buck, didn't rear. He exhaled, deep and slow, like someone had finally listened after years of screaming into the void. Hope leaned forward, pressing her cheek gently against his neck. He didn't need to be broken, she said aloud. Just heard. The words hit different. They weren't performance. They weren't protest. They were revelation. And in that moment, every cowboy who had ever raised a whip before a whisper, every trainer who'd confused fear for obedience, felt their ribs tighten around something they hadn't felt since they were boys. Shame. Ranger began to move. Slowly, deliberately. One step, another. He walked, with her on his back. Silence rippled across the land. Not out of awe, out of reckoning. And then came the screams. Not from a horse, not from Hope, but from the other side of the corral. A gate had been thrown open. Out stormed another stallion, wild-eyed, frothing, bucking against his reins. One of Ethan's prized studs. The one he'd been grooming for the press, for shows, for sponsors. A horse meant to be the face of his new equine venture. But the horse had broken loose. The ranch hands scrambled, shouting, trying to form a line. Hope turned Ranger calmly, facing the chaos. "No," she said. "Let him come." Ethan pushed forward. "Are you insane? Get off the horse. That one's rabid." Hope's eyes never left the approaching stallion. "No, he's hurting." Ranger stood still, ears forward. The other stallion charged, hooves striking sparks against the rocks. The crowd braced for disaster. But Hope didn't flinch. She didn't yank his mane, didn't scream. She began singing again, the lullaby, soft, unshaken, unapologetic. And just before impact, barely 5 feet away, the other stallion skidded to a halt. His chest heaved, his eyes locked on hers. He took one trembling step forward, then another. The crowd lost its mind. People screamed, cursed. One man hit his knees. But Hope, she stayed still, then turned slowly to Ethan. "Your methods breed fear," she said, voice sharp now. "But fear doesn't create loyalty. It creates rebellion." Ethan stepped back like she'd slapped him. Then came the final blow. An old ranch document, held up by Jed, the retired hand who'd recognized Hope earlier. Yellowed with age, signed by Henry Bennett. A will, leaving ownership of Ranger to his daughter. Hope, not Ethan. Ethan stumbled. "You had no right. You had no soul," Jed interrupted. And now the truth's out. Hope dismounted. She stood between the two stallions, both calm now, both watching her like students ready to learn again. And she said, "I'm not here to take what's mine. I'm here to rebuild what you destroyed." The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with understanding. The spell was broken, but the story, it was just beginning. It began with a breath, one drawn so deep it trembled through the ribs of a man who hadn't cried since his mother's funeral. His name was Hank, 62, a cowboy of the old order, boots stitched with pride, hands that smelled of saddle oil and silence. He stood by the fence, motionless, eyes locked on Hope still seated on the Mustang, like the girl had cracked open a secret no man had dared admit aloud. Next to him, his wife Martha clutched the edge of her blouse. Her hat slipped through her fingers. She let it fall, her eyes wide with disbelief, not at the horse, but at the man beside her. Hank was crying. It wasn't loud, There was no sob, just tears, clean and unhidden, sliding down the cracked planes of his sunburnt face. From the far end of the arena, young Tyler, barely 20, brash, full of fire, lowered his Stetson, stunned. He'd mocked Hope just a day earlier, called her the charity case with a belly full of nothing but delusion. Now he was the one gripping the rails, knuckles white, breath short. She changed him, he said, voice breaking. No, she changed us. A murmur passed through the crowd, but not the kind that begged attention. It was reverent. Men who had built their entire lives on domination were starting to question the foundation beneath their boots. One by one, the hats came off, not out of etiquette, but as if something sacred had passed through. Ethan, standing alone by the edge of the house porch, didn't speak. He couldn't. His face was pale, eyes hollowed out by disbelief. Not because Hope had tamed the beast he couldn't, but because she had done it without violence, without force, without a single lash of control. She had won with something Ethan didn't believe existed: mercy without weakness. Behind him, Sheriff Callahan arrived in his cruiser, having heard the town buzzing over the radio. But the sheriff didn't even step out at first. He just stared through the windshield at the strange stillness in the yard, until he noticed his deputy crying. "Deputy," he said, unsure. "Sir," the man whispered, "you need to see this." The sheriff stepped out and saw the most hardened men he'd ever arrested, wrestled, cuffed, or fined, now standing in a crooked half-circle. Hats in hand, faces red, silence thick. It wasn't just emotion. It was reckoning. Ranger, the horse they'd all called Hell on Hooves, now grazed quietly beside Hope. Her feet were still dangling, just above the dirt. Her face turned up to the sun like someone who had finally remembered how to breathe. And then came the voice. From Jed. Old Jed, the stable hand no one listened to unless it involved a busted pipe or a birth gone wrong. He took one step forward. His cane dug deep into the ground. "I knew her father," he said. "Henry didn't raise no fool." But even he wouldn't have believed this. The people turned. Jed's voice wavered. "This ain't about horses. Never was. It's about the things we let die when we get scared. Our patience, our softness, our belief that listening is stronger than force." He pointed at Hope. She reminded us. "God help us." She reminded me. No one dared interrupt. Then, unexpectedly, a child's voice cut through the silence. "Mommy," said a little boy from the crowd. "Is that lady an angel?" Mothers gasped. Fathers looked down. Hope slid off Ranger. Her knees buckled for a moment. Not from weakness, but from release. The pressure had drained. The storm inside had passed. She turned, slowly, scanning the faces now all pointed at her. Not a single one turned away. Even Ethan was frozen. "I didn't come here to impress you," she said calmly. "I came here because I didn't know where else I'd be allowed to keep my child safe. I came with nothing to prove, only something to protect." She placed her hand gently over her belly. "And this child will never be taught that power comes from fear." More tears. A woman named Bonnie stepped forward. A rancher's wife. A woman who'd once told Hope she'd never make it past the month. Bonnie felt her knees. "I was wrong," she whispered. "God forgive me. I was so wrong." Ethan took one step forward, then stopped. There was no more ground for him to stand on. Not morally, not legally, not even emotionally. In that moment, the ranch belonged to something else. Not to bloodlines or branding irons, not to legacy or contracts, but to truth, to softness, to the breaking of old walls. And for the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. Not loud, not wild, but right. And not a single person watching would ever forget the day they saw a girl and a horse change the nature of power. Forever. The glass slipped. It happened in slow motion. A tilt of the wrist too loose, the sound of ice striking polished wood, and amber liquid spilling over Ethan Whitmore's fingers before trickling off the edge of the porch railing like a confession he didn't mean to speak. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. For a man who had made empires rise and fall with boardroom words and steely-eyed stares, this was something entirely foreign. Helplessness. Not physical, not even social, No, this was internal. The collapse of the pillars that had once held up his entire identity. From where he stood on the wraparound porch of the ranch house, Ethan had full view of the arena, of hope, of midnight, standing at her side as if he had been waiting his entire life for her, and no one else, to arrive. The crowd hadn't dispersed. They stayed in stunned stillness. Men who once spat on the dirt at her feet were now speechless. Some prayed, some hugged, others stared at the ground, as if ashamed of what they had just realized about themselves. But Ethan couldn't look away. His hand was still frozen midair, whiskey glass tilted, liquor soaking into the sleeve of his $1,000 shirt. He could feel the burn on his skin, but it was the inside that burned hotter. "You all right, boss?" came a soft voice from behind. It was Maria, the housekeeper. 40 years she'd been with the Whitmore family. Raised Ethan when his mother lost herself in gin. She'd only ever called him Mr. Whitmore. But not today. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Something inside him had cracked. Not in anger. Not in shame. Not even in awe. It was recognition. Not of hope, but of himself, in a way he'd never allowed. Because hope had just done something he couldn't. She had disarmed a beast not by conquering it, but by understanding it. And in that understanding, Ethan saw a mirror. He was the Mustang. Wild, feared, and ultimately misunderstood. And hope had never once tried to tame him. She had ignored him. She had spoken only to the heart of the creature everyone said was lost. The horse. But now Ethan wasn't sure if she had been speaking to him all along. He gripped the railing so hard the wood creaked. Memories came uninvited. His mother, whispering apologies she never meant to keep. His father's boots disappearing down the hall after midnight arguments. The day he bought the ranch, not to preserve legacy, but to control it. The lawsuits, the rumors, the nights alone, drinking in the dark while telling himself he was the hero in a world too blind to see his value. But today, the world had seen something else. Someone else. And it had chosen her. Hope, the girl who arrived barefoot, pregnant, and carrying nothing but pain behind her eyes. Hope, who should have broken from humiliation, from exhaustion, from every whisper that said she didn't belong. Hope, who had refused to fight fire with fire. She had brought water instead. And now, Ethan, king of this land, lord of stone and contract, stood dripping whiskey down his cuff with no script to fall back on. Behind him, the house creaked. No one dared enter. He was alone, utterly, entirely. And for the first time, that aloneness didn't feel like strength. It felt like truth. Cold, final, and unrelenting. He exhaled, a sound barely audible over the wind. His gaze stayed locked on the arena, on her, and the next moment didn't belong to anyone else. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't spoken, but it was monumental. Ethan Whitmore, a man who had built his entire life on dominance, took one slow, deliberate step backward from the railing. It wasn't surrender. Not yet. But it wasn't defiance either. It was the beginning of something terrifying. The crack before the flood. And deep inside, something Ethan hadn't felt in decades stirred. Uncertainty. The paper trembled in Ethan's hand, but it wasn't the wind. It was the weight of every wrong decision, every silenced voice, every name he'd forgotten but profited from. The ink hadn't even dried properly. He'd scribbled the figure with the same intensity he once used to sign multi-million-dollar mergers. But this was different. This one, this paper, had blood on it. He walked slowly, not because of age or injury, but because each step felt like dragging chains. Hope stood in the center of the arena. Dust clung to her like armor. Her clothes were torn to the sleeve. A streak of sweat glistened down her neck. Midnight remained at her side, calm, loyal, as if the chaos of earlier had never existed. Ethan descended the steps alone. No cowboy trailed him. No assistant whispered instructions. Not even Maria was in the background to catch him if he faltered. That was the cost of power earned through fear. It never loved you back. He stopped a few feet from her. For the first time, the height of his boots didn't make him feel taller. Hope didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't offer a nod of recognition. She simply looked at him the way one looks at a stranger offering condolences too late. Ethan held out the check. $1 million. Signed. Unconditional. His voice cracked before it even formed, but when it finally left his throat, it carried more than money. It's yours, he said. You won. She blinked, not in surprise, but as if she had expected this and still had no use for it. Hope didn't reach for the check. Instead, she asked, "Won what?" The question cut deeper than any insult. Ethan looked down at the rectangle of paper between them. Once it would have bought loyalty, silence, even love. But now, in this arena, it looked like a relic of a man clinging to relevance. You tamed him. No one else could. His voice wavered, not with admiration, but with a dawning realization that even he didn't fully understand what she had accomplished. Hope took a slow breath. Her hand gently brushed the neck of the Mustang beside her. Midnight didn't move. I didn't tame him, she said. She let the silence fill the space where others would explain themselves. Then, as if handing down a sentence, she added, "He chose me." Ethan's hand faltered. The check lowered slightly. The crowd watched in silence. No applause, no shouts, just the weight of truth sinking into every bystander like sand in their boots. Hope's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "You think this is about winning?" she asked. "This animal, this arena, this crowd?" He opened his mouth to answer, but for once, there were no words. She stepped closer. "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I didn't come here for pity or money or a name. I came because something was broken. In him, in me, maybe in all of us." Her voice held no anger, only clarity. "And you think this," she gestured toward the check, "fixes that?" Ethan looked down at it. The signature at the bottom glared back like an accusation. She didn't take the check. She didn't reject it either. She simply turned to Midnight, whispered something inaudible, and began walking away, toward the exit, not the crowd. And that's when the twist came. One of the ranch hands, Rick, the loudest one, the one who had once laughed at Hope's appearance, stepped into Ethan's path. He didn't speak. He just looked at the check, then at Ethan, then at Hope. Then, without a word, he took off his hat, placed it over his chest, and followed her. Another man joined, then another. Within minutes, more than half the arena had cleared, not in chaos, but in quiet reverence. Following her, not because she asked, because they believed. Ethan stood alone again, except for the check in his hand, now damp with sweat and shame. It was the moment a man who owned everything realized he possessed nothing that couldn't be taken away by dignity. And Hope, she kept walking, pregnant, tired, barefoot, away from the check, the ranch, the applause, toward something no one could buy. Self-respect. The air in the arena was so still, it was as if time itself had held its breath. The check remained suspended in the space between them. Ethan Whitmore's trembling hand still extended, his knuckles pale, the paper flapping slightly in the wind like a fragile flag of surrender. Everyone watched. Every pair of eyes, from hardened ranchers to wide-eyed children perched on wooden rails, was fixed on one thing: what she would do next. Hope didn't move. Her fingers, rough from years without comfort, clenched the fabric of her faded denim pants. Her feet, blistered and dusty, remained planted firmly on the dry ground, the same ground where Midnight once reared, wild and unbroken. Now, the Mustang stood beside her, chest heaving softly, as if sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Ethan cleared his throat, as if words might rescue him. "It's yours. 1 million. I meant it." Hope's eyes didn't blink. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Not the check, not the sum, but the man behind it. She wasn't searching for sincerity. She was searching for understanding, for the kind of truth that money could never carry. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she took a step forward. The crowd leaned in. Another step. Hope stopped just inches from the check. Her shadow fell across Ethan's boots. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I didn't do it for money," she said. "I did it for him." The silence cracked like a whip. She didn't need to say who he was. The entire arena, for the first time, looked at Midnight not as a spectacle, but as someone who had been saved. Ethan lowered the check slightly, stunned, confused. Hope, you don't have to prove anything. You earned this. She shook her head once. Some things you don't put a price on. He took a small step back, as if her words physically hit him. And then, like a delayed reaction in a slow-burning fuse, someone laughed. It was nervous, awkward from the stands. Then another, a scoff, a voice muttering, "She's turning down $1 million." And then, the unexpected. Maria, Ethan's longtime personal advisor, emerged from the side gate, her heels clicking like metronomes on the wooden floor. Her face was unreadable. She walked past Ethan without looking at him and approached Hope. Then, without warning, she reached into her blazer, pulled out an envelope, and extended it. "This isn't a check," Maria said. "It's a contract." Hope narrowed her eyes. Maria's voice was calm, precise. "A permanent role here. Director of Equine Rehabilitation. Full benefits. A cabin. Safe space for your child. Your way, your terms." The audience was stunned. Ethan spun toward Maria, his voice low, sharp. "What are you doing?" She turned toward him. "What you should have done the moment she stepped into this place." Hope didn't respond immediately. She looked at the envelope, then back at Midnight. Then, the plot twisted again. Hope reached out, not for the contract, but for Ethan's check. She held it between two fingers, walked over to the fence, and climbed up a few rungs. With the entire crowd watching, she held the $1 million check above her head and tore it in half. Then again, and again, pieces of it floated to the dirt like snow in the middle of drought. No one moved. No one dared to. She descended, walked past Maria, looked Ethan in the eyes, and said, "You wanted control. What you saw today wasn't about control. It was about listening." She turned to Maria. "I'll take the cabin, but only if I can bring others." "Others?" Maria asked. Hope glanced toward the far gate, where a line of silent women stood. Women no one had noticed before. Women carrying babies, or trauma, or silence in their eyes. Former runaways. Survivors. "I'm not the only one who needs a place like this." For a long second, Maria looked at them, then at Hope, then nodded once. And, just like that, a new purpose was born out of what was meant to be a payoff. Hope didn't need Ethan's money. She had earned something no one could sign away. Trust, dignity, and a future that could change lives. Midnight neighed softly behind her, and Hope walked back to him, placing one hand gently on his side. He leaned into her, and for once, not even the richest man in the state could deny that the most powerful thing in that arena wasn't the money in his hand, but the truth that had finally found its voice. The sun was lowering behind the barn, casting golden streaks across the dust still swirling in the arena. A torn check had been replaced with a new one, and signed, unclaimed, yet burning with implication. Hope stood alone in the center, the crisp paper trembling in her fingers, not because of the wind, but because of what it meant. Midnight paced slowly nearby, calm now, as if the rage and scars of his past had finally been laid to rest. His breathing was steady, his eyes watching her, always watching her. Ethan stood across from her, waiting, his expression unreadable, his silence more haunting than words could ever be. For a man used to commanding boardrooms and buying anything with the swipe of a pen, this moment was something far more unnerving, because this woman, barefoot and worn, had become the one thing he couldn't predict, and she was deciding, not just about money, but about everything. The crowd was long gone. Only a few staff lingered in the shadows. Maria watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tense. A breeze rolled through, ruffling Hope's shirt, now stained not just by dirt, but by the weight of impossible choices. She looked at the check again. $1 million. It could change everything. A home, safety, doctors, school, shoes for her son, a door with a lock, a future without fear, but also guilt, doubt, the fear that she was selling something sacred, the truth, the trust, the soul of what had just happened between her and the horse no one else had believed in. She held it up. "I don't want to take this because it makes me feel like I did it for it," she said, voice raw. "But She paused. Her lips trembled. Her eyes flicked up toward the small, weathered cabin at the far end of the property where her son was sleeping. She had nothing to give him. No inheritance. No last name that opened doors. No safety net. But maybe, just maybe, she exhaled, long and slow. Then she looked straight at Ethan. If this can buy him tomorrow, if it means he'll have a bed, a chance, a way out of all this. She held the check to her chest like it was a photograph of someone she hadn't seen in years. Then I accept. Ethan's shoulders dropped, barely noticeable, but for the first time, something in him relented. You're not selling your soul, he said. You're saving his. Hope nodded once, but she didn't smile. This wasn't victory. This was survival. Then, suddenly, shouting, from the far gate, a man, tall and filthy, stumbled into view. One of the ranch hands ran toward him, confused. Sir, what are you doing here? This area's. But the man ignored them. His eyes were locked on Hope. She turned slowly, eyebrows drawing together. Do you know me? She asked. The man's lips parted. I think I might, he said. Your name's Hope Walker, right? Ethan stepped closer, now alert. What's this about? The stranger pulled a photo from his jacket. A woman, younger, smiling, pregnant. Hope stared. That was her. But the man's voice shook as he said, That's my sister. Everyone froze. The man continued. She died when her baby was born. They said he went into foster care. But I've been looking ever since. Hope's breath caught in her throat. Your sister, she whispered, was my mother. The man nodded. You're not alone, he said. Not anymore. Suddenly, the check didn't feel so heavy. Hope knelt down, placing the paper carefully in her worn leather bag. Not as a trophy, but as a tool. Then she stood and walked toward the man. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her voice cracked when she said, If that's true, I think we both just found something we weren't looking for. He held out his hand, not to shake hers, but to hold it. And for the first time, Hope took it. In that moment, with the sun sinking and the horse resting by the fence, the story didn't end. It began, because what Hope had fought for wasn't a prize or a performance. It was the chance to build something no one had ever given her. A future that didn't need to be perfect, just real. The dust had finally settled. What remained wasn't noise. It wasn't applause. It was reverence. Hope Walker stood still in the center of the ring, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soil that had felt the pounding hooves of 1,000 battles. But none like this. In her hand, the check, folded, heavy, symbolic. In her chest, a storm of gratitude, grief, and something else she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Midnight was no longer pacing. The massive black stallion stood near the edge of the corral, still and present, as if he too knew this was the end of something, or perhaps the beginning of something neither of them had words for. Hope took one slow step toward him. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. She reached out her hand, not to take, not to tame, but to honor. Her fingertips brushed against the rough edge of his mane, now tangled with dust and sweat. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. Her voice was low, almost caught in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, my friend. She didn't expect him to react. But Midnight dipped his head, just barely. As if he knew. As if he approved. As if he was letting her go. Hope didn't cry. Not yet. She turned. The crowd, sensing the moment, parted. Cowboys removed their hats. A woman clutched her chest, fighting tears she didn't fully understand. A boy held his father's hand tighter. Ethan Whitmore stood near the gate, eyes locked on her, but for once, with no control. No arrogance. Just silence. The kind that says more than apology. Maria was off to the side, wiping at her eyes, her lips trembling. She'd watched too many things die in this place. But today, something had come alive. Hope walked past them all, step by step. No music, no celebration, only awe. And then, just as she reached the gate, a scream broke the stillness. Fire. The stables. Everyone spun. Black smoke began to rise behind the east barn. Panic jolted through the spectators like electricity. Hope didn't hesitate. She shoved the check deep in her pocket and ran. back toward the danger, back toward the very place she had just walked away from, back toward midnight, because he was still inside, and so were others. Men shouted. Hoses failed. Flames climbed faster than they could react. But Hope didn't stop. She reached the stable doors, coughing, smoke stinging her eyes. The crackling sound of burning wood echoed around her like war drums. Midnight neighed inside, loud, fierce, afraid. Hope grabbed a loose bridle, wrapped it around her hand, and threw her body into the smoke. Move! She yelled at a stunned ranch hand frozen in fear. Get the others out. She plunged into the heat, past sparks and beams collapsing. And there he was, panic-stricken, rearing up, trapped behind a fallen beam. Come on, boy, she cried, eyes burning. Don't quit on me now. With all her weight, she pushed the beam. It shifted, barely. Her hands bled. Her lungs burned. But her voice never wavered. We don't end here. With one final surge, the beam tipped, crashing to the ground. Midnight burst forward. Together, they exploded out of the fire like phantoms. Hope coughing, stumbling, arm around his neck, guiding him through the chaos. The ranch hand cheered. Even Ethan ran toward her, face pale with something he'd never felt before. Fear for someone else. She collapsed to her knees in the dirt, chest heaving, the check now half burned in her pocket. Midnight stood beside her, his sides heaving, his eyes on her. They had both come back, from things no one else could have survived. Hope looked at Ethan, then at the crowd, then at the barn still smoldering, and only then did she realize. This wasn't the end of her story. This was just the moment it became legend. Hope Walker sat on the guest chair, her palms resting flat on her knees. The set was sleek, minimal, intentionally stripped down, the kind of stage where nothing could hide. The screen behind her flickered softly with an image of her on Midnight's back, frozen mid-leap. America had already seen the headlines. They had watched the video, but now they were about to hear her. And that was entirely different. Across from her, seated in a Taylor Navy suit, was Carter Langston, America's most trusted primetime interviewer, a man who'd made presidents cry and billionaires confess. He leaned forward, elbows on his thighs, eyes locked onto hers with a rare softness. Hope, he began, his voice steady but low. Millions watched you do what no one else could. You tamed Midnight. You walked away with a check that could change your life. But what people really want to know is, who are you when the cameras are off? The room went quiet. Hope's lips parted slightly. She glanced off camera, not to evade the question, but to search for the words. Then, she turned back and looked straight into the lens. The world only saw me the day I climbed on that horse, she said. But I existed long before anyone cared to look. A ripple passed through the audience. The crew behind the camera shifted, instinctively sensing that something real was unraveling before them. Hope continued, her voice raw but controlled. Before midnight, I slept in the back of a church bus behind a gas station in Lubbock. Before the headlines, I was begging store managers for expired baby formula. Before anyone said I was brave, I was scrubbing motel bathrooms for $5 an hour and praying my baby didn't wake up crying while I worked. Langston swallowed, and yet you stood in that corral and faced 1,000 pounds of muscle and fury without flinching. Hope allowed a faint smile, because that horse wasn't the scariest thing I'd ever faced. Loneliness was. Being invisible was. Feeling like I could vanish, and no one would notice. That was the real fear. There was a silence, thick and heavy. Even those watching from their living rooms could feel it. Why'd you do it? Langston finally asked. Why get on that horse? Was it the money? She exhaled. No, I did it because he was broken. And so was I. And for the first time, I looked into someone's eyes. Yes, someone, because he was more than an animal. And I knew what it felt like to be caged for too long. I knew what it was to be feared instead of understood. Then she paused. And maybe I thought if I could calm his storm, maybe I could quiet mine too. Langston looked down at his note cards, then set them aside. Hope, he said, there's a rumor that the shelter you're building, where the money from that check is going, it's not just for women in need. It's for women no one believes in. Is that true? Hope nodded slowly. There are shelters for abuse, for addiction, for recovery. But there aren't enough places for women whose only crime was being forgotten. I want to build a place for them. For us. And what will you call it? Hope's eyes glistened. His name, she said. I'm naming it Midnight's Chance. The audience gasped. Someone clapped. Then another. Until the room erupted. Not in a polite applause, but something deeper. A release. A reckoning. Then, just as the cameras began to pan out, Hope turned again to the lens. Don't wait for the world to see you to believe you exist. We're all here, even when no one's watching. In homes across the country, silence fell over dinner tables, over phones paused mid-scroll. The kind of silence that follows truth. And somewhere, in the heart of Texas, a woman in a rundown trailer watched Hope's face fill her old TV screen. Her eyes welled, her breath caught, because for the first time in years, someone had spoken her name without knowing it. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above a worn-out table cluttered with sketches, notebooks, and 3 half-drunk mugs of instant coffee. Hope Walker stood at the head of the room, her sleeves rolled up, her eyes tracing every detail on a wrinkled piece of paper. On it, the early blueprint of something bigger than herself, bigger than her pain, bigger than midnight. A sign on the wall, hastily printed in black marker, read, Midnight Shelter, Planning Session 1. She looked up at the 4 volunteers sitting before her. Ordinary people. An aging nurse named Rita with hands that never stopped shaking. A former architect who now lived in a van after a divorce destroyed his firm. A teenage intern from a local church who didn't say much. And an Iraq vet named Charles who had come just to donate chairs and never left. They weren't professionals. They weren't experts. But every one of them had known what it was to be invisible. That was enough. Hope laid both palms on the table. Her voice, calm but charged, broke the silence. We're not building a shelter, she said. We're building dignity. Charles blinked. What does that even look like? She turned the sketch toward them. A crude outline of a 1-level building with 10 private rooms, a birthing suite, a kitchen that actually looked like home, not an institution. A garden, a stable, privacy for one, Hope said. Not open bunks, not steel toilets with no doors. Real beds, real doors, locks they control, rooms with names instead of numbers. Rita lowered her eyes. Her voice cracked. I had my first kid in a gas station restroom. No one should ever feel that alone again. Hope nodded. We start with 10 women. Pregnant. Alone. No paperwork. No questions that make them feel like they have to earn being safe. The teenage intern raised her hand. Her name was Camila. But how will we keep it open? After the money runs out. Hope's smile was unexpected. It wasn't naive. It was deliberate. We sell what saved me, she said, reaching into a duffel bag. She pulled out a bundle of soft black fabric, hoodies, all stitched with one line across the chest in silver thread. I existed before you looked. She held one up. This isn't merch, she said. It's a reminder. People will wear it because it says what we all feel. And every sale funds another room, another chance. Suddenly, a hand slammed down on the table. It was the architect, Jim. He'd been silent the whole time, his face hard and skeptical. You're trying to build this with charity and slogans. You think it's that simple? Hope stepped closer, matching his energy with eerie stillness. No, she said. I think it's that desperate. Then she slid something across the table toward him. A torn, yellowed birth certificate. Her son's name, Micah. No father listed. The hospital name crossed out. Almost gave birth under a freeway pass. You know what it feels like to pray your baby doesn't come out while you're bleeding onto concrete? Silence. Jim didn't reply, but he opened the sketch pad, pulled a pen from his pocket, and began to redraw the roofline. A turning point. Just then, the door opened. A woman stood there, unwashed, shaking, clutching her swollen belly. Her name was Sasha. She didn't say it, but they could all see the question in her eyes. Hope walked over. We're not open yet, she said, but we're ready for you. Plot twist. Hope had used every dollar from the check already, on land, materials, legal work. The planning session was a cover. Sasha would be the first resident of a shelter that didn't yet exist on paper, but already lived in brick and belief. In the following days, news broke. The state threatened to shut the operation down. No permit, no compliance. But the public response was electric. People sent donations. A senator visited. Mothers left diapers and formula at the gate. But what truly shook the system was what came next. Hope got a call from Ethan Whitmore, the same man who had offered her the check, who owned Midnight, who once viewed her as a spectacle. Now he wanted a partner, sponsor, brand the shelter under his ranch name. Hope met him in a cafe 2 blocks from the shelter site. "You've built something," Ethan said, tapping the table. "I want to help it grow." Hope looked him in the eyes. "No," she replied. "You want to own it." He sat back. "You're making this personal." She stood. "It is personal, and you don't get to co-sign survival just because it makes for good press." As she walked out, a journalist waiting outside snapped a photo. The headline the next day: "She said no to a billionaire again." Hope Walker was no longer a woman who had once ridden a horse. She was becoming something else entirely, a force that no one saw coming. And this time, she wasn't riding alone. The ground cracked beneath their boots, not from weight, but from purpose. Hope Walker stood still at the center of the dusty lot, her shadow long in the late morning sun, a white hard hat sitting snugly on her head, dirt smudging her jeans, and sweat trailing along her neck. She gripped the handle of the shovel with both hands, not as a prop for the cameras circling them, but as a symbol. Her fingers curled tightly, like she was holding the throat of the past itself. Behind her, the land stretched raw and rough, a forgotten patch between warehouses and a freeway off-ramp. The city had called it undevelopable. She called it foundation. "Are you ready?" asked Camila, the once shy intern now standing taller than ever, clipboard in hand. Hope didn't answer with words. She drove the shovel into the earth. Cheers rose around her, not loud, not forced, just real. The kind of cheer that comes when people witness something sacred in the making. The camera zoomed in, but Hope ignored them. Her eyes were locked on the dirt, on the first brick, resting in a wheelbarrow behind her. One simple, red block. It wasn't about the brick. It was about everything it wasn't. It wasn't silence, it wasn't shame, it wasn't fear. She took the brick and knelt. Her voice, low but firm, carried across the lot. "Every wall we raise is a door we open for someone else." A gust of wind scattered sawdust and gravel as the volunteers began laying out the perimeter. Rita, the nurse, wiped tears with the back of her gloved hand. Jim, the architect, barked quiet orders. Charles, the veteran, hoisted wood beams like they were feathers. Even Ethan Whitmore was there, at a distance, dressed down, hands clean, watching through sunglasses no one had invited him to wear. And then came the first rupture. Just 2 hours into the build, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, expressionless. "This lot's under code review," one announced. City Council received a complaint. Hope stood, her jeans caked in dust, her knuckles bleeding from a nick on the brick's edge. "From who?" she asked, knowing the answer. The officer didn't respond, but she did. "You can shut down a building," she said. "You can't shut down a movement." The words weren't planned. They landed anyway. A reporter caught it on video. By nightfall, the clip had 3 million views. By the next morning, people were arriving at the lot with bricks of their own. Some old, some new, some painted with names, some wrapped in prayer notes. One carried ashes of a child lost on the streets. That day, Hope didn't lay bricks. She laid stories. Each person who arrived placed their brick in silence, then stepped back. Veterans, teachers, women in wheelchairs, teenagers who had aged out of foster care. Not a parade, not a protest, something different, something undeniable. But then came the second crack in the ground. Jim, the architect, collapsed mid-measurement. Ambulance, sirens, panic. Hope rode with him. Hope rode with him. Held his hand as he passed out from what they thought was heat stroke. Later, in the hospital hallway, the doctor called her aside. He knew. The doctor said quietly, "Stage 4. Didn't tell anyone." Hope sat down hard on the bench. Why would he keep building if he knew? The doctor shrugged. Some people don't build for themselves. Hope didn't cry. She just walked back to the site before sunrise the next morning and carved Jim's name into the wet cement by the front gate. By week 3, the building had form. Framework, beams, walls. A place where nightmares might unravel into new beginnings. And then came the betrayal. Camila, bright, loyal Camila, walked into Hope's trailer with tears in her eyes and a folded piece of paper. "I applied for a permit," she said, "months ago, without telling you. I thought it would help." Hope unfolded it. The rejection was dated last month. Camila had hidden it, lied, let them build with no legal standing. "Why?" Hope asked. Camila's voice trembled. "Because if you saw the no, I thought you'd stop." Hope stood there, betrayal and compassion battling in her throat. Then she turned away. "I don't stop," she said. But inside, she was breaking. The volunteers left that night, unsure if they'd return. The weight of legality, loss, and raw emotion hung in the air like thick dust. Then the final twist came, unexpected and cruel. The lot was set on fire. Arson. Someone had waited for the site to empty. Gasoline. Flames. By the time Hope arrived, the framing was gone. Just ash and twisted metal. But something stood in the center. The first brick. Still there. Charred, cracked, but unbroken. Hope stepped over the caution tape, knelt beside it, and placed her hand on its surface. And in that moment, the press didn't matter. The city's laws didn't matter. Even the timeline didn't matter. Because the shelter was no longer a building. It was a promise. And promises, when born from truth and forged in fire, don't need walls to live. They just need someone who refuses to walk away. The porch creaked under the weight of something heavier than footsteps. Ethan Whitmore stood at the edge of the old deck, boots planted shoulder-width apart, a glass of bourbon sweating in his right hand. The night stretched wide above him, clear, sharp, infinite. But he wasn't looking at the stars. He was staring at a single photograph in his left hand. It was frayed at the corners. Faded. Hope Walker, standing next to that wild stallion, midnight. Her hair windblown. Her expression, undeniable. Not because she smiled. She didn't. But because she looked real. Like someone who didn't care whether the world applauded or turned its back. Ethan sat down in the creaky rocking chair he'd inherited from his father. The one that had always felt more like a throne than a seat. Tonight, it felt too large. Or maybe it felt too small. Inside the house, everything was still. No music. No TV. Just the occasional groan of old timber and the distant chorus of crickets. He took a sip of the bourbon. It burned, but not as much as the question that wouldn't leave his mind. How'd she do it? How'd that woman, broken, barefoot, nameless, do what I couldn't? It wasn't about the shelter, or the horse, or the headlines that called her America's Grit. It was about truth, and Ethan had spent a lifetime avoiding it. He opened the manila envelope in his lap. More photos, all of them from the ranch. Some taken years ago. He flipped through them slowly. There was one of himself, much younger, arms slung around his late wife. She was laughing. He wasn't. Not really. There was one of the stables. Empty now. And one. Ethan paused. Of Joaquin, the old ranch hand. The one who disappeared without warning after Ethan cut his pay. Assuming loyalty came cheap. That photograph snapped something inside him. Because the truth he'd refused to face came rushing in all at once. He hadn't built a legacy. He'd built walls. Around himself. Around others. Around anything that looked like pain. And now those walls were collapsing. Ethan looked back up at the stars. One of them streaked across the sky. Silent, blazing, gone. "Coward," he whispered. But it wasn't aimed at anyone but himself. He pulled out his phone. Scrolled past the messages. Past the voicemails. Past the notifications. Until he found what he wasn't looking for, but had always needed to see. A video. Hope. Standing in front of the burned frame of a shelter. A brick in her hands. A smudge of ash across her cheek. Her voice raw. This place isn't about saving people. It's about reminding them they were never disposable. Ethan dropped the phone in his lap and leaned forward, elbows on knees. His voice cracked. Not loud, not dramatic. Just real. How did she find the courage I never did? He stood, walked to the edge of the porch. Below, the corral sat silent, the gates swinging lazily in the wind. Then he did something no one had seen him do in years. He opened the gate, not metaphorically, literally. He walked barefoot across the grass, opened the latch to the pasture, and just let it swing open. In the distance, a single horse, forgotten, old, watched him. Didn't run, didn't react, just waited. And Ethan? He waited too. For what? He didn't know. But for the first time in his life, he didn't try to control it. He just stood there, letting the silence say what pride never could. The envelope was unmarked. No logo, no return address, no handwriting on the outside. Just thick, cream-colored paper, sealed with a small crease like someone had pressed it closed with a trembling thumb. Hope Walker found it tucked under the office door, the one with the peeling paint and duct-taped mail slot. She blinked twice, unsure if it had been there long, and picked it up with the same cautious reverence you give to something fragile but potentially explosive. Inside, she expected another letter from the city, maybe a fine, maybe a warning. Instead, crisp bills, dozens, neatly stacked, $10,000. No note, no name. She stared at the money like it was a ghost, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Someone believed in her, enough to give, without asking anything in return, enough to remain invisible. She sank slowly into the chair at the rickety desk, the weight of the envelope still in her hand. Her fingers brushed the edge of the drawer where she kept a photo of the shelter's first blueprint. Just a child's drawing, honestly. Stick figures, a sun, and a big block labeled home. Hope set the envelope down, looked up at the peeling calendar on the wall, and said quietly to no one at all, "Whoever you are, thank you. This will save lives." But miles away, someone had heard her. Ethan Whitmore stood in his study, eyes locked on the screen of a burner phone he'd purchased anonymously from a gas station 3 towns over. He refreshed the donation portal, heart hammering. Confirmed. He took a step back from the desk. His hands were sweating. It had been a long time since they had. He didn't know what he expected. Some feeling of virtue? Relief? Redemption? But none of that came. Just silence. Just him and the empty glass beside the laptop. What surprised him most wasn't the size of the donation. It was the fact that he didn't want credit. Not anymore. He'd spent his whole life needing to be seen. Now he wanted to disappear into something better than himself. A few days later, Hope found another envelope, and then another. Always the same, generous, clean, silent. Each time she received one, something shifted, not just in the budget, but in her spirit, in the belief that maybe, just maybe, the world still had good men in it. Men who didn't need applause to do the right thing. Until one night, the money stopped, not because it ran out, but because something else arrived. A letter, typed, crisp, no greeting, just a single line. "Don't thank me. Just keep going." No signature. She turned it over, hoping for a clue. None. But for the first time in years, her eyes welled up, not from desperation or exhaustion, from awe. Someone out there wasn't just watching. They were walking with her invisibly, but faithfully. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Ethan had almost signed it. He had written his name 3 times, crossed it out 3 times, because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about Hope, not the woman, the word. The wind carried dust through the open gate of the new shelter, catching in the chain link, as if time itself were pausing to witness what was happening. Hope stood near the entrance, holding a clipboard that trembled slightly in her hand. She wasn't nervous. She was something more complicated, something that lived between reverence and disbelief. Because today wasn't just a milestone on paper. It was real now, tangible, breathing. Down the gravel road, a figure emerged. She was young, too young really, 19 maybe, skin pale beneath weeks of exposure, cheekbone bruised, lower lip split, and arms wrapped tightly around a squirming toddler who looked too tired to cry and too confused to sleep. His little shirt was buttoned wrong, his sneakers mismatched, his curls sticky from the heat. Hope didn't wait behind the gate. She walked to meet them, boots crunching against stone, eyes locked with the girl's as if trying to hold her up from a distance. The girl froze a few feet away, her expression caught somewhere between defiance and terror. She clutched the child harder, shoulders braced for another door to slam in her face. Hope didn't speak immediately. Instead, she knelt, slowly, deliberately, until she was eye level with the boy. "Hi there," she said gently, brushing a strand of hair for his damp forehead. Then she looked up at the mother, voice soft but solid. "You're safe now. No one's turning their back on you here." The girl's lip quivered. She blinked quickly, like she wasn't used to kindness that didn't cost something. Still kneeling, Hope reached out, not to take the child, but to offer her hand. Open, waiting. The girl stared at it. Then, without a word, she stepped forward. Behind them, the shelter loomed. Not massive, not gleaming. Just solid walls, real beds, and stocked shelves. A roof that didn't leak. A hallway that didn't echo with screaming. A kitchen that smelled like coffee and freshly baked cornbread. And a nursery where someone had taken the time to paint a mural of animals playing in a field. That night, after tucking her son into a crib that didn't have a hole in the mattress, the girl, her name was Marissa, asked to speak with Hope. They sat on the back steps beneath a flickering porch light. Marissa spoke in broken pieces, halting and raw. About her boyfriend who promised forever but delivered fists. About her parents who called her a disgrace. About the shelter she'd stayed in last week where someone stole her only blanket. Then she paused, cleared her throat, looked down. "There was this moment," she said, "back at the gate, when you didn't ask what I'd done or where I'd been. You just knelt down." Hope didn't respond. She didn't need to, because Marissa kept going. "I thought, maybe I could stay a few days. But now I think maybe I could, I don't know, work in the kitchen, help clean up. I don't want to just take." Hope smiled, but it wasn't a soft smile. It was sharp, proud, tired, and deeply human. "You're not taking," she said. "You're reclaiming." At dawn, while the others still slept, Marissa stood in the doorway of the common room, watching her son crawl over the carpet with a toy fire truck someone had donated. She didn't notice the figure watching her from the far end of the parking lot. Ethan. He was standing beside his truck, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. He had come to check on the structure, on the logistics. At least that's what he told himself. But what stopped him wasn't the building. It was her. Not Hope. Not the woman he thought had changed his life. It was Marissa. A stranger, yes. But her presence made everything more real than the schematics ever had. He could have driven away, left unnoticed. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to the front gate, and for the first time, he pressed the buzzer. Hope answered. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything about the envelopes. She didn't say anything at all. She simply opened the gate, and without fully understanding why, Ethan stepped inside. The sun had slipped low, casting long amber streaks across the sky like brushstrokes that bled into the still air. The scent of hay, asphalt, and hot metal lingered after the heat of the day. On the dusty road that led to the edge of the property, a black pickup truck came to a halt just beyond the tree line. No engine revving, no slamming doors, just silence and a presence. Ethan Whitmore hadn't planned this visit. Not really. He'd told himself he was headed to the feed supplier 2 towns over, that his GPS had taken a wrong turn, that he didn't even know where this road led. But the lie disintegrated the moment he saw the building. Brick and wood, unfinished corners, a gravel lot with 5 mismatched cars, and a crooked mailbox with midnight shelter painted in uneven brushstrokes. He stayed inside the truck. Hands clutched the steering wheel like it might keep his thoughts from cracking open. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to see through the windshield without drawing attention. Through the gate, 2 women stood under the porch awning, laughing over a plastic laundry basket full of baby clothes. A teenager brushed paint onto a side panel. A barefoot child in pink pajamas darted through the open yard, chasing bubbles that caught the evening light like floating fireflies. Ethan's jaw clenched. This was real. He hadn't donated to an idea, or to charity, or to some abstract cause that would show up on a tax form. He had helped build this, and yet, he couldn't make himself go any closer. On the passenger seat sat an envelope, Another one. Same clean white paper. Same folded check inside. Larger than the last. He reached for it, then stopped. A woman walked out the front door. Hope. She wore her boots like armor, one pant leg stained with mud. Hair pulled up with a pencil shoved through the knot. She carried a clipboard and a tired smile that never touched her eyes. Not fully. She glanced across the lot, almost instinctively, as if she felt something. Her eyes landed on the truck. She paused. He froze. The second her gaze sharpened, Ethan ducked lower, cursing himself beneath his breath. Like a teenager caught spying on a prom date, he never had the nerve to ask, what the hell was he doing here? But that was the thing, he didn't know. All he knew was that ever since he'd seen her kneel beside that girl at the gate, something had shifted, and now he couldn't stop circling the edges of whatever it was she had built. The child ran across the porch again, tripped, and started crying. One of the volunteers scooped her up, cradled her tight, and carried her back inside. The way that woman held her, something in Ethan cracked. Not loud, not visible, just a small internal fracture where pride had lived too long. He took the envelope and placed it gently into the glove box, then locked it. Then he sat back, elbows resting on the wheel, staring at the shelter through the glass until the sun disappeared and the first porch light flicked on. Hope never looked his way again. She was inside now, laughing with someone, flipping through a folder, living. But Ethan stayed, longer than he should have, long enough to realize he wasn't ready to go inside. Not yet. And maybe that was part of the truth he needed to face. Some doors aren't opened by keys. Some are only crossed when a man admits he's not who he thought he was. The engine of the truck eventually roared back to life. But before he turned the wheel, Ethan glanced back one more time. The porch, the light, the name painted on the wall in Hope's handwriting. Midnight Shelter. He exhaled hard through his nose, eyes wet, fists clenched, then drove away. Not fast, not far, just enough to keep watching from the places no one sees. The rain had started hours earlier, not the kind that rushed in with drama, but a steady, relentless kind that soaked everything with purpose. Outside the rural hospital in Johnson County, the parking lot gleamed under weak fluorescent lights, dotted with puddles and silence. Inside, in room 3B, a Hope Walker gripped the sides of the bed like her body was trying to split itself open. And maybe, in more ways than one, her face was slick with sweat. Her back arched involuntarily with every contraction, like her bones were being rearranged without consent. And yet, through the haze of pain and fluorescent ceiling lights, her eyes never left the woman standing to her right. Rosa, a former nurse who now taught the younger women in the shelter how to care for newborns using a plastic doll named Frankie. To her left stood Naomi, just 19 and barely 3 months free from the man who used to lock her in the basement. She held Hope's hand like she was anchoring both of them to the ground. Neither of them were blood, but both were family now. "Breathe with me," Rosa instructed calmly, her voice cutting through the panic like a lighthouse. Hope tried. She had been through so many battles. Courts, back alleys, the shame of asking for diapers in gas stations, the ache of sleeping beside a loaded gun with the safety off. But this was different, because this wasn't about survival. This was about surrender, a deep, full body letting go, of fear, of control, of the version of herself she had kept alive for too long because she didn't know what came next. And now, what came next had a name. Lucas. One more push. Her body screamed. A sound escaped her throat that wasn't human, but wasn't animal either. Something in between. Something primal. Naomi flinched, but didn't let go. Then silence. A second of terrifying stillness. Then the cry. Thin. Sharp. Alive. Hope gasped like she had surfaced from deep water. Her eyes snapped open. Rosa held a tiny, wriggling body in her arms, red-faced, wailing, furious at the light. "It's a boy," she said, already cleaning him. Hope blinked hard, trying to focus. Her heart galloped against her ribs, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of everything crashing down at once. She had made it. But just as Rosa turned to hand her the baby, the door burst open. A nurse rushed in. Behind her, A tall man stepped halfway into the room and froze. Ethan, soaked, pale, out of breath like he had sprinted through time itself. He wasn't supposed to be here. He didn't even know if he had the right. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Only watched from the margins like he deserved nothing more. But something had pulled him here. Some voice inside that said, "If you miss this moment, you don't get another." Hope's gaze locked with his. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She only looked down at the baby, now resting on her chest, skin to skin, his tiny fist curled like he was already ready to fight the world. Then back at Ethan. There was a beat of silence too thick to measure. Then Rosa broke it. "You're either in or out." But she just gave birth to a warrior, and we don't allow cowards in this room. Ethan stepped in. He didn't reach for the baby. He didn't dare. But he dropped to one knee beside the bed and looked at Hope like he was seeing a miracle unfold. Because he was. She looked different, not just physically, but in a way that stripped him of every excuse he had ever made. Her strength had nothing to do with posture or voice. It radiated from her like heat. "I didn't know," he began, voice cracking. "You weren't supposed to," she replied. And then she placed the baby in his arms. Not because he earned it, but because she chose not to punish him forever. The moment shattered something in him. It didn't erase his shame. It didn't rewrite his past. But it gave him something no amount of money or apology ever had. A beginning. He looked at the baby. Lucas, named not after anyone famous, not after any ancestor, but after a boy who once slept beside Hope on a shelter floor and whispered, "If I had a name like Lucas, I'd be brave." Hope had promised herself, if she ever had a child, he'd carry that bravery for all the kids who never got the chance. Now, that promise had skin and breath, and a heartbeat that pulsed in Ethan's arms. "You hear that?" Hope said through tears. "The world's waiting for you." And for once, Ethan believed it. Maybe not in himself, but in this child, in this woman, in what they had built, broken, and rebuilt together, without even knowing they had started laying the bricks long before today. The paper decorations trembled slightly in the breeze, slipping through the cracked windows. No air conditioning, just the rhythm of summer heat and ceiling fans that hummed like distant lullabies. The walls of the old chapel turn shelter were lined with hand-painted banners, letters crooked and colors mismatched. "Happy birthday, Lucas," one read, the S nearly falling off. No one cared. The room was alive, not with extravagance, but with something harder to come by. Sincerity. Laughter bloomed in every corner, as if defying all the things that had once tried to silence it. Hope stood at the back of the room for a moment, holding a cup of lemonade that tasted mostly like warm sugar water. She didn't mind. She watched Lucas toddle toward a cake that had only 2 candles, one for his birthday, and one for the year she almost didn't survive to see. He wore a crown made from an old cereal box. Ethan had painted it gold by hand, staying up till 3 a.m. with a brush that had lost half its bristles. Lucas clapped. Someone started singing too early. It didn't matter. Naomi grabbed a spoon and used it as a microphone. Rosa danced like she hadn't just had hip surgery. Even Maria, who barely spoke above a whisper since the night she arrived, let herself laugh from the belly for the first time. Hope blinked rapidly, not out of sadness, not entirely, but because she had almost given up on the idea that joy could exist without a catch. Ethan was in the corner, pouring punch like a high school volunteer. He didn't try to make speeches or center himself. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Still unsure of what he was to this place, but learning that being useful didn't always mean being seen. She stepped up beside him, nudging him with her elbow. "You made the crown." He smiled, almost embarrassed. "Used glue I found in the storage closet. Might be expired. It's holding better than some marriages." Ethan laughed, and then, just for a second, his hand brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. The party continued. Cupcakes vanished. Paper plates curled at the edges from melted frosting. Someone played music off a cracked phone speaker. There were no gifts, not in the traditional sense. Just notes scribbled on colored scraps of paper. "Lucas, you taught me how to hope again. You're the reason I stayed sober last week. You saved your mom, kid, whether she knows it or not." At the front of the room, Hope picked Lucas up. He giggled, face smeared with frosting, eyes shining with the kind of light that isn't taught. It's inherited. She looked around at the women, the volunteers, even Ethan, and said, "We don't have much, but we have this. Each other. And that's enough." The applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The real noise came from what wasn't said. The hundreds of nights they'd sat with each other in grief. The mornings they'd traded silence for shared coffee. The times they'd built a family without ever using the word. Then came the knock. Sharp, repeated, unplanned. Everyone froze. Hope set Lucas down slowly, walked to the door. When she opened it, a woman stood there, thin, bruised, clutching a blanket against her chest. Behind her, a little girl, maybe 6, peeked out, eyes wide. No luggage, just a grocery bag and exhaustion. Hope didn't hesitate. She stepped aside, but before the woman entered, she said, "I don't have anywhere to go." Hope looked over her shoulder at the room, full of mismatched chairs and melting balloons. "You're already here." The door closed. Somewhere in the back, Rosa grabbed an extra plate. Naomi poured juice. Ethan took Lucas to wipe his hands. No panic, no fanfare, just movement, acceptance. A ritual repeated, and in that moment, you realized this wasn't a celebration for a birthday. It was a ceremony for something far rarer. A world quietly rebuilt by the very people it tried to forget. The sun hadn't yet broken through the dawn fog when the call came. Hope answered it barefoot, standing in the kitchen with one hand on her stomach and the other still gripping a chipped mug of coffee. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from sleep, but from the kind of fatigue that lives in the bones of a woman who has survived too much and still keeps showing up. It was Nolan, the ranch foreman. His voice, usually so calm, had an edge today. "He's gone," he said. Hope didn't speak. Midnight. He's not in the corral. Gates shut, but the back fence. There's a section by the creek that's busted. We think he pushed through it. Hope stood still. The silence between her and the phone line became unbearable. Finally, she asked, "Any tracks?" None clear. The rain last night, it covered everything. The ache in her chest was sharp and immediate. Not because midnight was just a horse, but because he wasn't. He was the one thing that had seen her at her absolute worst and hadn't turned away. She hung up and grabbed her keys, leaving Lucas with Naomi and not even stopping to brush the mud off her boots. The ranch was 30 minutes away, but she got there in 20. When she arrived, Nolan was already waiting by the broken fence, squatting beside it with a piece of rope in his hands. "He snapped the wire clean," he said, shaking his head. No panic in the herd. No signs of struggle. It's like he just left. Hope ran her hand along the splintered wood. Midnight had always been different. Wild, unpredictable, but deeply attuned. The Mustang had trusted her, and that trust had not come easy. Now, after everything, he was gone. No warning, no trace. Something deeper was at play. Hope's heart pounded, not just with worry, but with a sense of dread. Midnight had been acting strange for weeks, pacing the fence at odd hours, refusing food some nights, always looking east, toward the hills. And then there was the letter she received 2 days earlier. No name, no return address. Just a single sentence scribbled across the paper. "You can only heal what doesn't try to run first." She had shown it to no one. It had unnerved her. She assumed it was metaphorical, until now. Back at the barn, Ethan stood by the tackroom door. He looked at her differently now. Not with the eyes of a man who pitied her, but with someone who had once drowned and now recognized the same water in another. "You think someone took him?" he asked. Hope shook her head slowly. "No, I think he left, and I think he needed me to notice." Later that night, she returned home, only to find her front door slightly ajar. Her instincts kicked in immediately. She rushed inside, heart racing, searching for Lucas. But there he was, asleep in Naomi's arms, safe. On the kitchen table, a horseshoe. Midnight's. Still worn, still warm. Next to it, a folded photo, one that had gone missing months ago. In it, a younger Hope stood beside a man with a rancher's hat and weathered hands. Her father, dead nearly 15 years. On the back of the photo, in handwriting she didn't recognize. He followed him. Hope collapsed into a chair, mind reeling. Her father had once tried to train a Mustang, just like Midnight. He'd failed. The horse never let him close. After his death, Midnight had appeared on the ranch, untamed, wild-eyed. No one had ever connected the two. But now, was it possible? She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she drove east. For hours, she searched the ridges, calling his name, her voice growing raw. By dusk, she found hoofprints in the red dirt, fresh, deliberate. She followed them for miles until they disappeared at the edge of a bluff overlooking a wide valley. And there he stood, Midnight, just beyond the crest, mane blowing in the wind, eyes locked on her. He didn't move. Neither did she. Then, from behind him, a smaller figure emerged. Another horse, skinny, young, malnourished, scared. A colt. Midnight had led her to him. The colt stepped forward cautiously. Hope dropped to her knees, hands open, tears falling before she could understand why. He came to her, let her touch him. Midnight walked away without a sound, his job done. Hope never saw him again. But the colt stayed. She named him Chance, and he would become the heart of the new program. The one where every girl who came through the shelter learned how to hold a rope not to restrain, but to release. Not to command, but to connect. Midnight disappeared to make sure something else could begin. And in his vanishing, he left behind not absence, but a new kind of presence. The kind that echoes. The kind that changes everything. Even you. It was just before noon when the dust cloud began to rise on the old county road. The kind of dry, slow roll that told you someone was coming, but not in a rush. Inside the shelter, Hope was in the laundry room folding a load of baby clothes. Lucas's onesies, freshly sun-dried and still smelling faintly of lavender and smoke from the fire pit the women used on cold mornings. The shelter wasn't fancy, but it was sacred in its own way. Built with hands that once shook from fear, raised by people who had lost everything but found themselves again on this soil. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled her from the haze of memory. She stepped outside. There he was, standing by the entrance gate, where no one expected him to ever return. Ethan Whitmore, but not as he once was. No pressed slacks, no button-down shirts, no gold cufflinks, no silk-lined boots. Just jeans that had seen better days, a faded t-shirt that clung to his frame, and boots that looked borrowed or forgotten at the back of someone else's closet. He held his hat in one hand, like he wasn't sure he deserved to wear it anymore. Hope didn't speak. Neither did he. He didn't walk with his old swagger. His shoulders were lower now, his breath deeper, and his eyes, those same eyes that once ordered people without words, were red-rimmed. Not from age. From regret. Can I? His voice cracked and he paused, then steadied. Can I see it? See what? Hope asked, though she already knew. He looked around, at the gardens the women had planted, the porch swing with its mismatched cushions, the chicken coop held together with rusted nails and good intentions. All of it, he said. I just want to understand what you built. Hope watched him for a long moment, then stepped aside and opened the gate. He didn't rush in. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if every footstep might erase some of the things he'd once said or done. The women inside froze when they saw him. Some remembered the old Ethan, the tycoon with the iron voice and colder wallet. Others had only heard stories, but all of them recognized what stood before them. A man stripped bare of everything that once made him untouchable. Naomi stepped forward first, protective by instinct. What does he want? She asked Hope, arms folded. Hope glanced at Ethan. I think he wants to learn what it means to kneel before something he didn't build. Naomi didn't smile, but she nodded. They gave him a tour of the nursery where Lucas had taken his first steps, the dining area where women laughed over burned casseroles and shared dreams they weren't supposed to have, the stables, clean, modest, each horse with a story. Midnight's stall stood empty, but Ethan lingered by it longer than any other. Hope didn't follow him when he paused there. She waited by the garden, hands in the dirt, planting something small and green. When he returned, his voice was quieter. I didn't understand, he said. "When you left." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "You weren't ready." He took a slow breath. "And now?" She looked up. "Now you're here." Another silence fell, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. "Why name it after him?" Ethan finally asked. "Midnight." Hope smiled faintly. "Because he saw in the dark, even when I couldn't." Later that evening, he didn't leave. He asked to help wash the dishes. He fed the chickens. He rocked a crying baby to sleep with hands that once signed contracts worth millions. And then came the moment no one expected. He stayed the night, not in the guest trailer, but on a cot in the shared room. When someone asked him why, he said only, "Because for once, I want to wake up where things are real." But the real shock came weeks later. Ethan sold the ranch, gave up everything. The mansion, the land, the accounts that held his father's legacy like a noose. He wrote a check to the shelter that made Hope's breath catch in her chest. But more than that, he asked for a job, not as a donor or a face for the press, but as a stable hand, to muck stalls, to fix fences, to learn from scratch. They let him, and in time, he stopped being the man who once ruled an empire. He became something far rarer, a man who knew the weight of silence and chose to listen. The hallway was narrow, barely enough room for two people to pass without brushing shoulders. Paint peeled near the bottom of the wall where kids' tricycles had scraped over time. The light above flickered occasionally, not from poor wiring, but because no one had gotten around to replacing the bulb. It was that kind of place, patched with effort, held up by intention. Hope was carrying a stack of books, donated novels, old parenting guides, some worn Bibles with notes scribbled in margins, when she turned the corner and froze mid-step. Ethan stood at the other end, not in a suit, not surrounded by staff or press, just standing there, alone. He hadn't seen her yet. His head was tilted as if he'd been studying the family photo collage on the wall. There was one picture of Lucas smeared in frosting, laughing with his mouth wide open, hands in the air like he had conquered the world. That photo had become a symbol in the shelter, proof that joy could grow in unlikely places. When he finally turned and saw her, he didn't startle. Neither did she. They stood frozen for a second too long. Long enough for all the unspoken things to press in between them. She hadn't seen him this close in over a year. He looked different up close. Thinner, yes, but also softer, like someone who'd been hollowed out by choices and now stood carefully filled with something new. Not pride, not apology, just presence. He cleared his throat, but no words came. Hope adjusted the stack in her arms, not out of discomfort, but because her heart was pounding in a way she hadn't felt since the day she'd left the ranch. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice low and even. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes not leaving hers. "Neither did I." Silence settled in the corridor, not heavy, but delicate, like a string pulled taut. "But I think," he started, swallowing hard, "I think I needed to." Hope didn't move, didn't smile, but didn't walk away either. That was new. That was everything. He gestured toward the stack she carried. "Want a hand?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "They're lighter than they look." He nodded again. "I remember you saying that about yourself once." A beat. She blinked. It was the first time he had ever quoted her. Not to gain favor, not to mock, just to remember. "I wasn't lying," she replied. "I know," he said. "I didn't see it back then. You didn't want to. I couldn't." The light flickered above them. This time it buzzed too, like it might finally give out. Neither flinched. He looked at her again, really looked, and added, "You look tired." "I am, but strong. I've had to be." He nodded again, then said something he hadn't rehearsed. "You always were." She felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not affection, just space. A crack where resentment had lived. And through that crack, something else filtered in. Something unnamed. She stepped aside. He walked past her slowly, close enough to touch, but he didn't. Respectful of her perimeter. But right before he turned the corner, he stopped. "Hope." She turned. "If you'd let me," he said, "I'd like to come back tomorrow. Not a visit. To help." Hope didn't answer right away, but her silence didn't mean no. It just meant he'd have to show up. Again. and again, like trust, brick by brick. And as he walked away, she didn't cry. She didn't smile either. But she stayed there, watching him go, not waiting, just open. The earth was dry and stubborn that morning. It hadn't rained in weeks, and the sun bore down on the small garden behind the shelter like it was punishing something. The soil cracked in places, hard as stone. It wasn't the kind of day people planted things. But Ethan knelt anyway. He wasn't wearing gloves. His fingernails, once manicured by executive assistants, were caked in dirt. Sweat had already darkened the back of his shirt. A child's plastic shovel sat uselessly beside him, forgotten after a few of the kids lost interest and ran off to chase a stray chicken. Only Lucas, now walking and loud, remained by his side, squatting in the dirt with the serious intensity only a 1-year-old could muster. Ethan looked at the small sapling beside him. It wasn't tall, maybe 3 feet. A peach tree. Not the most practical choice, but it had been Hope's favorite growing up. That tiny fact had surfaced in one of her rare, accidental stories about her childhood. He'd remembered. Somehow, he picked up the root ball and lowered it into the hole he'd spent nearly an hour digging. Lucas reached out and touched one of the leaves with chubby fingers. "You think it'll survive?" asked a voice behind him. It was Marlene, one of the older women who helped run the shelter. She wore a sun hat that had seen better decades, and her hands were deep in her apron pockets. "I don't know," Ethan answered honest, "but I wanted to." She stepped closer and squinted down at the tree. "Never planted anything before. Only regrets." Marlene chuckled, not meanly, just knowingly. "Well," she said, "regrets don't bear fruit." Lucas let out a joyful yell as a ladybug landed on the tree's stem. Ethan looked at the child, then back at the tree, and covered the roots carefully with soil. Not rushed, not careless, as if each movement mattered. After a long moment, he said quietly, almost to himself, "Grow strong. No rush." Marlene tilted her head. "That for the tree or for you?" "Maybe both." She nodded. "Then say it louder. Kids need to hear things twice." Ethan looked at Lucas, who stared back with wide eyes. "Grow strong," Ethan repeated. "No rush." Lucas mimicked the sound, half gibberish, half miracle. In the distance, Hope had been watching, hidden behind a curtain upstairs, through a cracked window. She wasn't ready to join them. Not yet. But something about the way Ethan handled that tree, not like a billionaire, not like a guest, but like someone with something real to lose, made her linger a little longer before pulling the curtain closed again. Later that week, a storm broke the drought. The kids danced barefoot in the mud, and the peach tree, against all odds, held its ground. They said later it shouldn't have survived that soil. Too dry, too shallow, too broken. But it did. And for reasons no one could quite explain, the first fruit appeared far earlier than expected. The kids were the first to find it, but they didn't pick it. They waited, because somehow they understood some things take root only when someone decides to stay. It was a Saturday, the kind of Texas Saturday that felt heavy with heat and the sound of cicadas drilling through the air. The backyard of the shelter was alive with children, chalk dust rising from sidewalks, laughter skipping across the grass, someone chasing someone else in a game with no clear rules. But near the far corner of the garden, just beyond the chicken coop and the old wooden bench Ethan had fixed last week, a group of them gathered around the tree. The tree had grown faster than anyone expected. One of the branches had a green nub on it. Barely a fruit, just a promise. It was enough to spark curiosity. "Miss Hope," asked Ava, the girl with skinned knees and too much courage, "does the tree have a name?" Hope stood nearby, hands dusty from pulling weeds, watching her son Lucas attempt to pour water from a cracked plastic cup onto a stubborn weed. She hadn't heard the question the first time, or maybe she had and pretended not to. Some questions carried more weight than the kids asking them realized. Ava asked again, louder now, with a giggle that covered her genuine curiosity. "You know, like how people name pets, or stuffed animals." Hope walked over slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans, and looked down at the peach tree. It had changed, not just in size. There was something different in the way it stood now. Stronger, taller, like it had decided it belonged here after all. The other children gathered closer. "I don't know," Hope said. "What do you all think we should name it?" "Peachy," someone shouted. "No, Mr. Fruit. Treesy McTreeface," another yelled, sending the group into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. Hope smiled, kneeling beside them. "No, really," Ava said, catching her breath. "What do you think?" Hope looked at the leaves. Some were curled at the edges from the last dry wind, but most were rich green, full of life. A single drop of water slid down one and fell to the soil. She didn't answer right away, because sometimes the truth takes a second to form in your mouth. When it came, it wasn't dramatic, just simple, final. "We'll call her Hope," she said. The kids paused. Then Ava wrinkled her nose. "But that's your name." Hope looked at her. "Not because of me, because of what we planted here." That made them stop. Not because they fully understood, but because they could feel that they should. One of the younger boys, Mason, reached out and touched the bark. "She's going to be big someday," he whispered. Hope nodded. "She already is." A moment passed, and then Lucas, muddy, barefoot, and totally unaware of the emotional gravity of the scene, threw his cup in the air and shouted, "Hope." Everyone burst out laughing. Later that night, after the kids had gone inside and the sun had slipped low, Hope stayed by the tree. Ethan had left a pair of gardening gloves on the bench. Marlene's old straw hat lay forgotten nearby. It was the kind of quiet that didn't beg for words. She pressed her palm against the bark, not gently, firmly, like she was grounding herself. From behind, a familiar voice called softly, "Looks like she's already part of the family." Hope turned. It was Ethan, holding 2 cups of lemonade. She hadn't expected him to stay this long, or show up again after that first visit. But there he was. She walked over and took the cup from him. "You named her after yourself?" he teased. "I named her after the only thing that kept us alive," she said, then took a sip. Ethan didn't smile. Not really, but his eyes softened. "Then maybe you should name the shelter next." Hope looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what you built here. It's more than I ever imagined it could be. And if people ask what turned this place around, it wasn't my money. It was something else." Hope didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next morning, a small wooden sign appeared beneath the tree. It read, "Hope, planted by those who refuse to give up." And beneath that, in smaller print, "She grows stronger every day." The morning was still, but not silent. The scrape of broom bristles across the porch, the low creak of the chicken coop's gate, and the distant hum of tires against the gravel road reminded Hope that life at the shelter never paused, not even for miracles. She stood barefoot on the edge of the patio, her fingers coated in flour from kneading dough earlier that morning. But now, all of her attention was fixed on the boy no taller than her hip. Lucas, her son. The sun hit his curly hair like it had been waiting just for him. He stood near the doorway in his oversized overalls, one strap slipping down his tiny shoulder, his eyes locked on a crude wooden horse standing a few feet away. Its paint had long since chipped. Someone, probably Ethan, had carved it out of a discarded fence post months ago and left it there. For decoration, or for faith. Hope didn't move. She knew if she even breathed too loud, she might break whatever magic was building inside that boy's heart. Lucas had never walked. He'd taken steps, wobbly, leaning on the furniture steps. But this was different. No hands to hold, no couch to grip, just dirt, wind, and the call of something beyond himself. He lifted one foot. It hovered, then came down, uncertain but bold. Then the other. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast, but it was forward. Hope's hands clenched into fists at her sides, flour falling like pale snow to the ground. "Bye, meu pequeño," she whispered, slipping back into the language of her grandmother without realizing it. "The world is yours now." Lucas stumbled once, regained balance, then another step, and another, until the tips of his fingers brushed the side of the horse's wooden mane. He looked back at her with eyes that carried the weight of things he was too young to name. Resilience, hunger, pride. Hope let out a laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was full. Behind her, Ethan had stopped sweeping. He didn't say anything, just watched, silent approval. but someone else clapped. It was Marlene, the oldest woman at the shelter, leaning on her walker, her eyes shining. Then Ava joined, then Mason. Within seconds, the courtyard echoed with the applause of children and survivors, and people who hadn't cheered in years. Lucas flinched, startled. Then he grinned, and fell straight on his butt. Everyone laughed, loudly, fully, but Hope didn't run to pick him up. She walked, slowly, letting him try to get up first, letting him learn. When she reached him, Lucas was already on all fours, determined. She knelt down. "You did it," she said. Lucas, with a smile full of 2 teeth and infinite possibilities, pointed toward the wooden horse. "Name?" he asked. Hope paused. They had named the tree. They had named the shelter. But this horse was his. "Your turn," she said. Lucas thought hard. Then, in a mixture of babble and English, he said something that sounded like Nao. "Nao?" Hope asked, smiling. Lucas nodded. "Then Nao it is," she said. Later that day, as the sun bent low, Ethan came by with a hammer and a piece of scrap wood. He carved the name into it, nailed it to the side of the horse, and said nothing more. But something about that act, a name on a thing that couldn't move, honoring the boy who finally could, brought Hope to tears that night. Not because her son had walked, but because no one had ever told her he would. No doctor, no specialist, no well-meaning nurse in that bleak city hospital had ever said he might. They had said if, and it felt like a lifetime of maybe. But now the earth had shifted. Lucas had walked, and tomorrow, he would run. The wind cut across the open fields like it carried a secret. Hope stood at the edge of the pasture behind the shelter, her hair whipped back by the breeze, her eyes locked on the trees beyond the split-rail fence. She hadn't come out here for a reason. Sometimes her body just took her places before her mind caught up. A habit born from instinct, of a woman who'd once lived on alert every second of the day. Some habits stayed, no matter how much peace tried to take their place. The children were inside. Ethan was helping Lucas draw letters in chalk on the patio. Life had found rhythm, but something in the air this morning had shifted. The kind of shift you don't explain. You just know. And then she saw it. A silhouette. Large. Familiar. Walking, not galloping, not charging, but walking with the slow, dignified weight of something ancient and free. Her breath stopped. Her legs buckled slightly. For a moment, she questioned if she was hallucinating. But no, it was real. Midnight. The horse stepped out from the grove of oak trees at the far edge of the property. His black coat, streaked with dust and the shimmer of sun, looked untouched by time. His mane danced with the wind like he belonged to it. Midnight, her voice cracked. "You came back." She didn't shout, didn't call out with desperation. She just stood there, letting the gravity of the moment pull tears from her eyes. The last time she had seen him was the morning after the flood. The fences were down, chaos everywhere. He had disappeared. Some thought he drowned. Others said he bolted toward the hills. She never believed either. Midnight wasn't just a horse. He was the first creature who had looked at her, really looked, and seen not a homeless woman, not a burden, not a statistic, but a human. That kind of connection doesn't vanish. The horse came closer, step by step, until only the fence separated them. Hope reached out a trembling hand. Midnight didn't flinch. He lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against her palm like no time had passed. And just like that, something inside her broke. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, still holding his face. She laughed through tears, overwhelmed by the impossible becoming true. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Ethan. He stopped short when he saw them. For a long second, he didn't speak. Then, I thought he was gone. Hope stood up, brushing her hands on her jeans. So did I. Ethan climbed through the fence quietly. Midnight didn't move. "What made him come back now?" he asked. Hope looked at the shelter, at the tree they planted last week, at Lucas peeking out the kitchen door. "He came home," she said, "because now it feels like one." They stood there, the three of them, man, woman, and beast, in the open, wind singing through the grass. But just when the moment felt complete, when everything seemed too perfect to be real, a sound shattered the stillness. The crack of tires on gravel. Hope turned instantly. A black SUV pulled onto the far end of the pasture. Her body tensed. Ethan cursed under his breath. That's Garrett's vehicle. Garrett Whitmore. Ethan's older brother. The one who had once tried to buy the land under their feet and shut the shelter down. Hope's voice turned cold. What the hell does he want now? The door opened. Garrett stepped out, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a boy. Teenager. Dark hair. Sullen eyes. He looked barely 16. Garrett raised a hand. He's not mine. Hope blinked. What? He's yours. Or at least, yours to save. I can't handle him. He ran away 3 times. Broke into the school once. But he saw a picture of this place on your site. Said he recognized the horse. He looked at Midnight. I figured you'd know what to do. Garrett turned, got back in the SUV, and left the boy standing in the dust. Hope and Ethan exchanged a look. The kind of look that speaks years of shared pain and defiance in a single breath. Hope approached the boy slowly. What's your name? She asked gently. The boy didn't answer at first. He looked past her, toward Midnight. His eyes softened, just a little. Ty, he said finally. Hope extended her hand. Welcome home, Ty. Midnight stepped forward, as if he, too, was ready to begin again. At first, it was just laughter, bright and unpredictable, the kind of sound that only children can make, raw, uninhibited, as if their lungs had never known sorrow. Hope heard it from the kitchen window as she rinsed dishes with one hand. Lucas perched on her hip. The sky outside was painted in late afternoon gold, and the wind carried the scent of hay and sun-warmed earth. But it was the laughter that made her pause. She turned toward the sound. Across the open field, a parade was unfolding. Chaotic, beautiful, impossible. 8 children, all of them barefoot, covered in dust, faces lit by joy. And at the center of it all, Midnight. The horse galloped not out of fear nor force, but with a measured grace, his black coat gleaming in the light, mane flying like war banners. He slowed just enough to let the children keep up. Then he would stop, wait, lower his head, then burst forward again in a playful trot. They chased him, cheered him. One of the older boys, Ezra, even leapt onto his back, bareback, no saddle, clinging tight to the animal's sides, laughing like a child who had forgotten he'd once lived in the backseat of a car for 6 months. Hope stepped outside, her heart aching from the sight. Midnight had changed. He wasn't the wild, untouchable force he had once been. And yet, he had not been tamed in the traditional sense. No one had broken him. No one had claimed him. Instead, he had chosen. He had chosen to stay, to walk among the broken without stepping on them, to guide without dragging, to watch without judgment. He was no longer just a horse. He was something else entirely. Ethan came up beside her, wiping his hand with a towel. You seeing what I'm seeing? She nodded. He's teaching them. Ethan chuckled. Teaching them what? To run, without looking back. In that moment, as if on cue, one of the younger girls, Josie, barely 5, tripped and fell. Her knees scraped the earth, and she let out a sharp cry. Midnight stopped instantly. He turned, walked back, lowered his head to her level, and waited. Josie sniffled, wiped her face with the back of her hand, then reached up and touched his muzzle. She climbed onto his back, small arms hugging his neck, and together they walked. The rest of the children followed, now quieter, more reverent. Ezra ran up to Hope, breathing hard. His shirt stuck to his chest, his eyes wide. Miss Hope, he said between gasps. He's not just a horse. He's our guard dog, but bigger and smarter. Hope smiled. You think he's watching over you? Ezra shook his head. I know he is. Then he added, with the kind of seriousness only a child can deliver. He's our guardian, like in the old stories. From behind them, a sound broke the moment. A shout, panicked, urgent. A boy, Ty, the runaway Garrett had dropped off days ago, came sprinting down the path from the barn. His face was pale, his hand clutched around something shiny. A knife. Hope stepped forward, alarmed. Ty, what's going on? He stopped, panting hard. The guy from my old place. He found me. He's outside the gate. Said if I don't go with him, he'll burn this place down. Ethan was already moving. You stay here, he told Hope. But Midnight had already reacted. The stallion turned sharply, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Without command, he bolted toward the gate. His steps thundered through the ground. Hope ran after him, heart in her throat. At the entrance, a tall man stood near a rusted truck, cigarette in his mouth, rage in his stance. He barely had time to react before Midnight skidded to a halt inches from him, rearing back. The man stumbled, falling into the dirt. What the? Get this beast away from me. Ethan arrived seconds later, radio in hand. The sheriff's car pulled in behind them. The man was arrested without incident. Apparently, there had been a warrant already. They were just missing the final call and the final witness. Hope turned a tie. He looked at the ground. I can testify, he said. I'm done running. Hope touched his shoulder. You're not alone anymore. That night, around the fire pit behind the shelter, the kids gathered. Midnight stood at the edge of the light, still, like a statue carved out of something older than stone. Ezra leaned into Hope and asked, Do you think he knows he saved us? Hope looked at the children, looked at Midnight, then whispered, I think. He always knew. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the thunder ever had. Inside the old brick room that served as the heart of the shelter, the fire in the corner fireplace crackled lazily. Shadows danced along the chipped walls, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and burnt cedar. The children were asleep. Midnight was outside, unmoving under the oak tree, as if he, too, knew this night was different. Hope sat at the end of a long wooden table, a steaming cup of peppermint tea cupped in both hands, elbows on the oak, her back slightly hunched with the fatigue that only hope and grief combined can produce. Her long hair was still wet from bathing Lucas, who now slept soundly in the next room, his tiny chest rising and falling like a calm tide. Ethan stepped into the room. He didn't speak at first, just watched her from the doorway. His boots were still muddy from the field. His button-down shirt hung open at the collar. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a quiet war happening in his face, like a man who had finally decided that silence was heavier than truth. You ever wonder what kind of man you'd be if no one ever asked you to be better? He asked. Hope turned her eyes to him, wary, but open. I spent most of my life hiding behind checks, Ethan said, stepping forward. Foundations, causes, scholarships. They all had my name, but none of them ever had my face. I thought giving money meant I didn't have to give anything else, least of all myself. She said nothing, but her stillness made him continue. This place, he said, nodding around the room. This shelter, the land it sits on, it was mine. Legally, it still is. I donated it anonymously through one of my companies. Even Midnight, the stallion, he came from my father's stable. I sent him here after he bucked his last trainer. Thought maybe he'd just live out his days and die alone, like I figured I would. Hope blinked. Why tell me now? Ethan took a seat across from her, his hands clasped like a man waiting for a sentence to be read. Because I didn't know what courage was until I met you. The words landed like a confession and a curse at once. Hope stared at him, unsure whether to speak, to cry, or to run. Ethan's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with that specific pressure a man feels when he's told the truth for the first time in years and doesn't know what comes after. I saw you walk through that gate, he continued, with your son in your arms, no shoes, no shield, no plan. Just trust. You didn't ask for help. You made the world help you just by being in it. You think that's courage? Hope asked, her voice barely more than breath. It was survival. I didn't have another option. Ethan leaned closer. That's the point. Real courage is when you have nothing, and you still move forward. I had everything and stood still. Hope looked down at her cup. Steam rose and disappeared. Then, softly, why now? Why tonight? Ethan swallowed. Because I'm selling the ranch. The one in Houston. Everything else too. I already signed the papers. Her brow furrowed. What does that mean? He pulled a folded document from his pocket, placed it on the table, and slid it to her. Her name was on the deed. I'm giving this place to you, he said. Hope stared at the paper like it had fangs. I don't want, she began. I know, he interrupted gently. That's why it has to be you. She picked up the paper, hands trembling. You could have kept hiding. Why stop? Because Lucas called me Dad this morning by accident, Ethan said, eyes now fixed on the fire. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to correct him. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was thick, unresolved, necessary. Hope stood slowly, walked to the window. Midnight was still there. Then she asked, without turning, "What are you going to do now?" Ethan stood as well. "I'm not sure, but I know it starts with not running for myself anymore." She turned. Their eyes met. A long look, honest, unadorned. And then she smiled. Not because everything was forgiven, not because it made things right, but because it finally made sense. Ethan walked to the door. Before stepping out, he turned back, voice steady. "You taught me what a real home looks like, Hope. And it's not made of walls or money. It's made of someone brave enough to stay when it's easier to leave." He stepped into the night. The wind caught the door for a moment, but didn't close it. Hope stood there, papers in hand, the fire warming her back, and whispered to no one. He finally saw us. No one spoke as the sun began to rise behind the ridge. The early morning light spilled over the field and touched the wall like it knew exactly where to go. It wasn't a tall wall. In fact, it was intentionally kept low, just enough so that children could reach it with their fingers and elders could rest their palms on its surface. But what made it powerful wasn't the height. It was the weight of the names. Hope stood in front of it barefoot, the dew soaking into the hem of her long skirt, hands dirty with dust from the engraving tools. Behind her, a crowd had gathered, women, children, men, all in quiet anticipation. Some had tears. Others had clenched jaws and trembling hands. But they all came for one reason: to witness the unveiling of what had never been said out loud. The wall was made from pieces of stone salvaged from a collapsed barn. Not because it was cheap, but because it mattered. Every brick had scars, cracks, evidence of struggle. Just like the women whose names were now carved into it. No plaques, no fancy lettering, just etched names, imperfect but deliberate, like they had been written by hand on the earth itself. Ethan was there too, standing off to the side, hat in hand, his eyes locked on Hope. Not because she was speaking, but because for the first time, she was silent, and that silence said everything. Hope stepped forward and placed her palm on the first name, Joanna Lee. She had been a mother of 3, disappeared in 1998. Her case was closed as unresolved, but her sister, now standing in the back of the crowd with tears streaming down her face, had never stopped looking. Another name, Maria Alvarez, died giving birth under a bridge in Dallas. The hospital report had labeled her as unknown female, Hispanic descent. Hope turned to face the group. Her voice was steady, not loud, but every syllable hit like a hammer. "These names," she said, "don't belong in silence anymore." She took a breath. Every woman here, at some point in her life, was made to feel invisible by a system, by a man, by a world that only saw what it wanted. But they existed. They mattered. And now, they are seen. She motioned to the children. Lucas was in the front, holding a candle too big for his little hands. Behind him, 5 girls stepped forward, each holding a flower. One by one, they laid the flowers at the base of the wall. Then the twist. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. Older, maybe late 50s, with deep lines on her face and a limp that made each step deliberate. She looked familiar, like someone who'd been on the edge of everyone's memory. Hope blinked, stunned. The woman looked straight at her and whispered, "Do you remember me?" The name Carla Dawn Wexley was carved third from the bottom. "She was me," the woman said. "But I didn't die. I disappeared because it was the only way I could survive." Gasps. A pause that stretched into disbelief. "I read about this place," she continued. "Saw the pictures online. Thought maybe, if I came back, I wouldn't be a ghost anymore." Hope didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, took the woman's hand, and nodded. "Then we'll carve a new name beside the old one," she said. "The one you choose now." The crowd erupted. Not in applause, but in understanding. And then another plot twist. One of the men who'd helped build the shelter's kitchen, a kind-hearted volunteer named Mark, walked forward. He'd never spoken much about his past, always showing up early and leaving without fanfare. But now he pulled something from his back pocket, a tattered notebook. He handed it to Hope. Inside, dozens of names. Women he'd met during his years driving trucks across the country. Some he'd tried to help, some he couldn't. "I didn't know what to do with these," he said. "I just couldn't forget." Hope took the notebook, and this time her voice cracked. "Then we won't forget either." That day, more than 40 new names were added to the wall. Not all of them confirmed, not all of them complete, but every single one was written with reverence. And as the sun reached the top of the ridge, something strange happened. Midnight, the black horse once known for his fury, trotted slowly up the hill and stopped beside the wall. He didn't make a sound, just stood there, head lowered, as if he understood. A little girl reached up and touched his side, and in a voice no one expected said, "He's not just a horse. He's watching over them." Hope looked back at the wall, at the names, at the people now kneeling in front of it. "No one stays invisible forever," she said. "Not here. Not anymore." Rain was not in the forecast, but that didn't stop it from falling. It came gently, like it knew this moment had waited too long to be real. The chairs were mismatched, folding metal ones with dents and chipped paint, lined up in front of an old barn repurposed as a hall. Balloons were taped to wooden beams, with crooked smiles drawn on them. A makeshift banner hung overhead. "Congratulations, Nicole." Each letter hand-painted by a different child. Hope stood at the back, arms crossed, fingers clutching the sleeve of her jacket. She wasn't the type to cry easily. Not anymore. Not after what she'd seen, and survived, and buried deep. But something about the girl in the front, standing there in that borrowed cap and gown, made her ribs ache. Nicole Rivera, age 21, hair braided tight, wearing a pair of secondhand boots that didn't quite match her gown, looked up from the speech she'd written and met Hope's eyes. And just for a second, the past threatened to erupt in the space between them. But Nicole didn't flinch. "If I'm standing here," she said, holding her paper with trembling hands, "it's because someone saw me before I knew how to see myself." A pause. No one tells you how loud the world can get when you're trying to disappear. When you've been told, over and over, that your voice doesn't matter, that your future already got decided without you, that you're just another case number in a file cabinet somewhere. She looked down. But here, I wasn't a number. I wasn't a problem. I was possible. In the audience, a boy began to clap. Then another. Then the room followed. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunder. But what made it unforgettable, what would haunt everyone who had shown up that day, was what happened after. When the ceremony ended and people crowded around Nicole with cameras and hugs and handshakes, a figure stood frozen near the edge of the barn. A woman, early 40s, brittle posture, eyes swollen like someone who hadn't slept in years. Hope noticed her first. She walked over. Cautiously. "I know you," Hope said. "You've been watching the shelters feed for weeks." The woman nodded, said nothing. Hope tilted her head. "You're not here by accident." The woman stepped forward, then stopped. Her eyes fell on Nicole, then back to Hope. "I gave her up when she was 6, she said, voice barely audible. "I wasn't ready. Not even close. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I wasn't, but I never stopped checking." Hope's heart felt like it might burst. She took a breath, choosing her next words like defusing a bomb. "She made it," she said simply. "And now, it's your choice whether you stay a ghost or become someone real again." Nicole turned just in time to see the woman standing alone. The crowd melted away. Everything else went silent. They locked eyes. And then the twist. Nicole didn't run to her. She didn't collapse in tears. She walked, slow, firm, deliberate. When she got close enough, she pulled something from her pocket. A photograph. Tattered, faded. 2 women. One young, one barely more than a girl. Smiling in a hospital bed. "Is this you?" Nicole asked. The woman blinked, then nodded. Nicole looked down at the photo, then up again. "Then we're not strangers. We're just overdue." They didn't hug. Not yet. But something passed between them that didn't need words. Another twist waited. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan approached Hope. His eyes were red. He handed her a worn envelope. "College application," he said. "For her. Full ride. Whatever she wants to be." Hope opened it. Inside, not just a check, but a letter. It wasn't signed Ethan Whitmore. It was signed Dad. She looked at him, stunned. "She's not my daughter," he said quickly. "But every time I see her, I remember the daughter I never knew how to raise." I figured, maybe this is how I start making that right. Hope said nothing. She didn't need to. And then one final shock came as the ceremony ended. Nicole stood on the small wooden stage again, holding her diploma. She looked at the back of the room, to the faces still lingering. "There are more girls like me out there," she said. "Hiding, running, wishing someone would see them." She held up the diploma high above her head. "Well, I see them, and I'm not going to stop until every single one of them gets their name called too." Hope's eyes filled for the first time in years. Because in that moment, Nicole wasn't just graduating from school. She was becoming the kind of woman who would one day take Hope's place. The wind carried the scent of dry cedar and dust. It was a warm Texas night, the kind that presses gently on your skin like an old memory. The stars hung low, bold and unmoving, watching. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime rattled softly against the side of the shelter. Crickets filled the silence like a choir too afraid to sing too loud. Lucas sat alone on the back steps of the women's shelter, elbows resting on his knees, a guitar balanced on his lap. Old, scratched, and missing one string. He didn't need the missing note. What he was playing didn't need to be whole to mean something. His fingers moved with care, like he was afraid the melody might break if he pressed too hard. It was the lullaby, the same one his mother used to hum when he couldn't sleep. The same one that, according to every woman in the shelter and a few of the ranch hands, had once stilled the fury of a wild black stallion who didn't trust anyone, not even the woman who rescued him. Lucas didn't really believe in legends. He believed in survival. He believed in his mother. But a horse turning gentle just because of a melody? That sounded like a lie people told themselves so they could sleep. Yet, here he was playing the song. And not just because he missed her. Not just because she wasn't around that night. But because something in him was aching. Something deep, unnamed. Footsteps approached behind him. "I never thought I'd hear that tune again," said an old voice, rough and low. Lucas turned. It was Grady, the man who had once cared for Midnight after he was found wandering the woods years ago. Everyone thought Grady was just a groundskeeper. He wasn't. "You knew this song?" Lucas asked, lowering the guitar. Grady nodded, settling beside him with a tired groan. "I heard your mama hum it when no one else was listening. When she was brushing Midnight. When she was bleeding and wouldn't tell anyone. When she thought no one saw her cry." Lucas blinked. "She told me she made it up for me." "She did," Grady said, "but I don't think it was ever for you. Not at first. It was for herself. Then Midnight. Then you. That song. It carried everything she couldn't say." A long silence passed between them. Lucas swallowed hard. Was it really true? Lucas asked, voice low, "Did that song calm him down? Or is that just some kind of bedtime story?" Grady turned toward him slowly. "That horse never let anyone ride him. Not one damn soul. But one night, your mama, broken ribs and all, she walked into that corral after midnight, barefoot and sobbing, holding you in one arm. She sang it." And he bowed his head. Lucas didn't answer. He just stared at the guitar, then back out to the field. "I think I needed to believe it wasn't real," Lucas whispered. "Because if it was, I've been pretending her strength was a myth." Grady placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you stop pretending." They sat in silence again, until something moved in the distance. Lucas squinted. There, far beyond the wire fence, a shadow shifted. A tall figure, four-legged, slow, careful, watching. Lucas stood up fast. "That's not, couldn't be," Grady interrupted, already standing, already walking forward. But it was Midnight, older now, ribs more visible beneath the coat, a small white scar across his flank, like a signature from time itself. No saddle, no halter, just him, and that stare. Lucas didn't move. He couldn't. Midnight came closer, step by step. No one dared breathe. And then Lucas, trembling, lifted the guitar again. He strummed, softly, the same notes, the same rise and fall. Midnight stopped and bowed his head. Hope appeared in the doorway then, older, tired, but still fierce. Her hand flew to her mouth. "He came back," she whispered. Her voice cracked. After all these years. Lucas didn't look at her. He was staring at Midnight. And then he asked, in a voice just above a whisper, "Was this the song that changed everything, Mom?" But Hope didn't answer. She was crying now, not out of sadness, not even joy, but because she realized something. Lucas wasn't just her son. He had something of Midnight in him. Not just the music, but the trust, the instinct, the defiance. She walked toward them. "I never told you this," she said, voice trembling. "But you were the reason I survived. Not the song, not the shelter. You." Lucas turned slowly. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, tears streaming. "When I was ready to give up, I heard you crying in your sleep. And then Midnight. He came to the door. He had never come that close. But that night, he stood by the window, watching you. Watching us." Her voice cracked again. "I think he knew. If I didn't live for me, I had to live for you." Lucas looked back at Midnight, stunned. Grady stepped forward. "He's not here just to say goodbye." Lucas turned sharply. "What?" Grady's eyes were damp. "He came back, because you're ready." Lucas frowned. "Ready for what?" Grady smiled faintly. "To take the reins." Then Midnight did something no one expected. He stepped forward and bent his knees, lowering himself, inviting, waiting. Lucas dropped the guitar and walked toward the stallion, not as a boy who had played a lullaby, but as a man who finally understood the meaning behind it. The reins weren't just about control. They were about legacy. Midnight hadn't come for Hope. He had come for a son, because some things, love, memory, courage, don't end. They change form. They keep writing. Through music, through blood, through stories no one dares to forget. And in that field, under the Texas stars, the next chapter began without a single word. The dogs didn't bark that night. That's how Hope knew something was different. The gate buzzed once, then silence. The moon was half hidden behind a cover of clouds, casting long, uncertain shadows across the gravel road leading to the shelter. It was late, later than usual for visitors. Most nights, the women inside were already asleep by this time, curled up in narrow beds with secondhand blankets and fresh scars. Emotional ones, physical ones, the kind you don't talk about in daylight. Hope had been finishing the books, donation records, expense logs, another letter to the county begging for hot water repairs, when the intercom buzzed. She almost ignored it. It was probably a raccoon, or someone drunk and lost. But something made her go. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe it was because 21 years ago, someone had opened that same gate for her. She stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter. And there, standing barefoot in the dirt, shaking slightly, was a girl. No more than 19. Pregnant. 8 months, maybe 9. She had a bruised cheek and wild eyes that tried to look defiant but were too tired to hold a lie. Hope walked slowly. The girl flinched. Hope stopped. Neither spoke. The wind tugged at the girl's oversized flannel shirt, worn thin over a white tank top stained with something dark. Her hands were clenched protectively around her belly, and her feet were bleeding. Hope remembered that pain. The pain of standing too long when your body is too heavy. The pain of having nowhere to sit that isn't dangerous. The pain of pretending you're not scared. She took another step forward and said, softly, "You're not alone." Not anymore. The girl's face crumpled. Not all at once. Just enough. Like her walls had been waiting for permission to fall. Hope wrapped an arm around her shoulders. But then, something else happened. The girl didn't lean in. She pulled back slightly, looked up at Hope and asked, "Are you her?" Hope blinked. Her who? The woman from the horse story. Hope's stomach turned cold. "What did you say?" The girl reached in her back pocket and pulled out a folded page, soft from wear. She handed it to Hope. It was an article. Old, torn from a forgotten newspaper. The ink was fading, but the headline was still legible. Single mother tames wild stallion. Builds shelter for women left behind. Hope felt like her lungs had stopped working. I found this at a bus stop in El Paso. The girl said, eyes wide now. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just one of those made-up things. But then I saw the name. Hope Walker. I memorized it. I told myself, if I ever made it far enough, I'd find her. Hope shook her head, still gripping the paper. I was never supposed to be that, she said. I was just trying to survive. But you did more, the girl said. You made it possible for people like me to believe they could survive too. Hope didn't have an answer for that. Because inside, she still didn't believe she was enough. That shelter had come from desperation, not vision, from a need to do something, anything, with all the pain she couldn't bury. But somehow, here was this girl, alive, standing, brave in her own way. And then the plot twisted again. The girl said, almost casually, my mom said I had your eyes. Hope froze. What did you just say? She used to say I had your eyes. The girl repeated, confused now. But I never met you. I thought she was just being poetic or something. Hope felt like the ground had just shifted under her. Who's your mother? She asked, her voice barely audible. The girl reached in her coat again and handed Hope a photo. A woman. Thin. Brown eyes. Scar on her left hand. Hope's knees nearly gave out. She knew that woman. Her name was Rachel. She had been here almost 2 decades ago. Barely stayed 2 weeks before running off in the middle of the night. Pregnant. Alone. Hope had searched. Filed reports. Prayed. Failed. And now, Hope looked up. This girl was her goddaughter. She had promised Rachel she would protect the child if anything ever happened. She had failed, or so she thought. The girl looked scared now. Are you okay? Hope laughed through the tears. No, but I think I will be. She opened the gate. Come in. The girl hesitated. And then, a final twist. She said, I don't know if I can stay. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Hope didn't flinch. She said, that's what every woman who walks through this gate thinks. But strength isn't something you arrive with. It's something you build while bleeding. The girl looked down at her feet. Then, slowly she stepped inside, and the gate clicked shut behind her. Hope watched her walk toward the porch, then turned her eyes to the dark fields beyond. She thought of midnight, of Lucas, of all the women who had walked through that gate broken, and left holding pieces they never thought they'd find again. And without meaning to, she whispered, welcome home. The machines in room 309 weren't loud. That's what made it worse. Beeping softly, breathing regulated. Tubes. A nurse charting numbers on a screen. But the silence in between, that was the part that made Lucas feel like he was standing on a wire stretched over nothing. Ethan Whitmore lay in the hospital bed, thinner than Lucas had ever seen him. His once imposing figure, the man who could buy an entire county with a phone call, now looked barely held together by the sheets. The television above the bed was on mute, playing a baseball game Ethan wasn't watching. His eyes were closed when Lucas walked in. Lucas hesitated in the doorway. He hadn't seen Ethan in over a year. Not since the night he left for California. The night they fought. Not like grandfather and grandson, but like 2 men tired of disappointing each other. Lucas cleared his throat. Ethan opened one eye, then the other. You came, he said, his voice low but steady. Lucas nodded. You asked. Ethan chuckled. You always were literal. There was a long pause. Lucas walked to the window, looked out at the city lights, then back at the man who raised him like a business asset, not a boy. Why me? Lucas asked. Why now? Ethan didn't answer at first. Then he looked at the monitor, the heart rate line rising and falling. I don't have time to waste anymore, Ethan said, and I've wasted enough of yours. Lucas stayed silent. Ethan reached for something on the nightstand. A photograph. He handed it to Lucas. Hope, younger, standing with a horse. Midnight, and beside her, Ethan himself. Lucas stared at it, stunned. This is real, Ethan said. She didn't know I was there. I want to see for myself the shelter she built. I didn't tell anyone, just watched her. With those women, with that animal. Lucas felt a cold sting in his chest. She built something out of nothing. Ethan continued. while I was too busy building everything out of lies. Lucas looked up, suddenly angry. You spent your whole life chasing power. You threw away people like paper. I know, Ethan replied. And now, I'm the one being discarded. By my own body. He coughed, violently, blood on the tissue. Lucas turned away. He couldn't watch. Ethan leaned back. I asked to see you because I don't have a son. Never did. But I had you. And I ruined that too. Lucas clenched his jaw. Then Ethan said something Lucas never expected. Teach him what I learned. Too late. Lucas turned. Ooh. Ethan looked at him. Tears in his eyes for the first time Lucas could remember. Your brother. Lucas's entire body went still. My what? Ethan nodded. Hope. Never told you everything. I only found out last year. After a private investigation I had no right to initiate. He gestured toward the drawer in the nightstand. Lucas opened it. Inside was a letter. A birth certificate. The father's name, Ethan Whitmore. The mother's name, Rachel. The baby's name, Elijah Walker. A name Lucas had only seen once. On a list of past residents of the shelter. He's 17 now, Ethan said. Smart. Angry. Kind. Like Hope used to be. Like you were before I taught you to distrust softness. Lucas stared at the paper, his hands shaking. This is why I brought you here, Ethan said. Not for me. For him. I need you to be the man I never was. The brother I never let you be. Lucas sat down hard. Everything he thought he knew about family, about the past, cracked in his hands like thin glass. And then Ethan said the words that split the air open. Already signed it over. The ranch. The business. Everything. Not to you. To the shelter. Lucas's head snapped up. What? Ethan's eyes were calm. I gave it all to Hope. And, through her, to every woman who walked through those doors. Including Rachel. Including you. Lucas swallowed. And Elijah? Ethan smiled. You'll know what to do. You always did. Even when I hated it. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Ethan reached out, slow, shaking, and Lucas took his hand. It was warm, alive, but fading. And as Lucas sat there, holding the hand of the man who once made him feel like a transaction, he realized something terrifying and true. Sometimes, the people who break us the worst are the ones who need us the most in the end. He didn't forgive Ethan. Not fully. But he stayed. And that, in its own way, was enough. For now, it didn't smell like a hospital. Not today. There were flowers in the room. Sunflowers. Oddly enough, brought by someone Ethan couldn't place. The nurse said it was a former resident. That meant one thing. The shelter. Hope had sent them. Lucas sat in the corner. Sleepless eyes. Rough beard. One boot untied. Ethan Whitmore lay in the bed. A man at the edge of time. Not clinging, not begging, just watching. A soft knock. It was Hope. She didn't speak when she entered. She just placed something on the nightstand. A single photograph. One Lucas hadn't seen before. It showed a girl, probably 17, holding a tiny foal in her arms like it weighed nothing. The girl was crying, smiling, covered in dirt. Ethan's eyes flicked to the picture. That's Meadow, he breathed. Hope nodded. The first horse we ever rehabilitated. She was abandoned with her legs tied. Took us a year to get her to trust people again. Ethan stared at the image for a long time. Then, that horse lived. Hope looked him in the eye. She still does. He turned his head toward the window. Then maybe there's still hope for me too. Lucas stood up, unsure if that was meant to be a joke. Hope didn't smile. She pulled out a small folder from her bag and handed it to Ethan. Before you say anything, she said, no, we're not here for the land. We don't want a ranch. We don't need it. Ethan looked at the folder and pushed it aside. I know. Silence again. This time he broke it. I've spent decades controlling people. With money. Fear. Silence. I thought power was something you wore. Like a suit. Turns out it wears you. Lucas shifted in place, arms crossed, biting his cheek. Ethan turned to them both. I'm dying. That part isn't the tragedy. Lucas braced himself. The tragedy, Ethan continued, is that I finally understand what I could have done, and now I'm almost out of time. Hope walked to the bed, her voice firm. Then don't waste the last of it. He nodded slowly. There's one more thing, Ethan said, his voice thinner now. He reached under the mattress and pulled out a legal document. Already signed. Already notarized. Lucas leaned forward. Ethan placed it on the tray between them. It's done. The ranch, the livestock, the training facility, they're not for sale. Not anymore. Hope blinked. It all goes to the shelter, Ethan said, with one condition. Lucas tensed. Here it comes. But what Ethan said next felt like something torn straight from a confession booth, not a boardroom. It has to remain wild. Hope furrowed her brow. What? The land. The horses. The memory of what was done there. It should never be polished. It should heal people because it reminds them how far pain can go if no one stops it. Lucas stepped back, breath caught. Let be a place of scars, Ethan said, and forgiveness. Hope stared at him. You wanted to be a living memory. He nodded. Exactly. Then, he turned to Lucas. I don't need forgiveness. I need consequences. I want them written into the soil. Lucas swallowed. And I want you to be the one who builds it. Hope gasped. But Ethan wasn't finished. You thought you came from nowhere, Lucas. But your name is Whitmore. Not because of blood. Because you saw what I never did. You saw Hope as a person before I saw her as a name on a lawsuit. Lucas shook his head. I'm not. You are. Ethan interrupted. And that boy, Elijah, he'll need a real example. Not a legend. A man. Lucas looked at Hope. Then back at Ethan. You really want this? Ethan nodded. Then give me one more favor, Lucas said, voice cracking. Tell me why now? Why this? Ethan's eyes welled. Because I saw her feed a horse with a broken leg and call it beautiful. Because I watched you leave this life and not take a cent. Because when you love something enough to walk away from it, that's when it becomes yours. The heart monitor beeped faster now. Hope moved closer. Lucas gripped his grandfather's hand. Ethan took a breath. Let the land serve people, not command them. And with that last sentence, his chest settled, his eyes fixed on the sun bleeding through the curtains. He didn't flinch. He just stopped. Hope didn't cry. Not at first. Neither did Lucas. They sat in the silence for a long while. Then Hope leaned over and whispered something no one else would ever hear. Lucas folded the document. Not with relief, but with reverence. The empire was dead, but from its ruins, something sacred would grow. Something that didn't wear a suit. Something barefoot and free. The first to arrive was not a politician. It wasn't a news crew, or a lawyer, or even a donor. It was a little girl in a faded red hoodie, holding the hand of her father, an ex-con who'd been silent the entire bus ride. When the gates opened, they didn't ask questions. They just walked forward, as if the ground itself had called them. And maybe it had. The new sign hadn't been installed yet. The paint was still drying, but the name had already spread among those who needed it most. Campo de Vida. Hope stood by the entrance, not with a clipboard, not with a welcoming speech, but with an old, worn-out bucket of apples in one hand and a sleeping foal in the other arm. Life in one hand, innocence in the other. Behind her, everything had changed. The barns were no longer white. They were painted with handprints, layers and layers of color left by children and survivors alike. The old training pens had been repurposed into vegetable gardens. The whip poles had been pulled out by their roots. Not hidden, displayed, with a sign that read, "No one commands here." The crowd gathered slowly, one by one. Some came by bus. Some came walking. Some with everything they owned in a backpack. Others with nothing but a name and a heartbeat. Lucas stood under the oak tree where Ethan used to host his staff meetings. He held his mother's journal in one hand and his guitar in the other. He hadn't played since the hospital, but today he would. He watched Hope approach the old platform that once served as a stage for sales and auctions. Now, it had a banner above it, Campo de Vida, where no one has to choose between living or running. Hope took a breath. No microphone, no cameras, just silence. Then she spoke. I was once told I had no value, that my worth was what I cost someone. So people lowered their eyes. But I met a horse who didn't believe that. A few smiled, knowing the name. He didn't speak. He didn't kneel. He didn't obey. He just stood there and didn't run away when I screamed. Lucas closed his eyes. Hope continued. I want to name this place something that meant freedom. But freedom's not always enough. Sometimes, people don't want to be free. They just want to be safe. Seen. Believed. She paused. Let the air settle. So, I called it Campo de Vida, Field of Life. Because here, we don't rescue. We don't fix. We don't transform. A deep breath. We receive. A long silence. Then, something unexpected. From the crowd, a voice. Who owns it? Hope looked out and found the speaker. A teenage boy, arms crossed, jaw tense. She smiled. No one. The boy raised his brow. Then who makes the rules? Hope didn't hesitate. The wind. Some laughed nervously. Others were silent. Lucas took that as his cue. He stepped on a platform and sat down with a guitar. His fingers trembled slightly. The song he played wasn't one of celebration. It was the lullaby. The one his mother once sang to a terrified horse in a broken stall. The same one she whispered in the dark when the shelter first opened. But halfway through, something shifted. Lucas changed keys. Then tempo. He rewrote it in real time. Transformed it from a lullaby into a hymn. A hymn not of mourning, but of reclamation. That's when the girl in the red hoodie let go of her father's hand and walked toward the platform. She sat cross-legged at Lucas' feet. Then another child joined. Then two more. Soon, the platform wasn't a stage. It was a circle. And in that circle, the newest generation sat without fear, while the oldest remembered how to breathe again. A woman approached Hope quietly. She had no shoes. Her dress was torn, but her eyes. Hope recognized those eyes. The woman held a tiny baby, swaddled in a torn flannel shirt. I walked 3 nights to get here, she said. People said this place doesn't judge. Hope didn't nod. She didn't offer a bed. She held out her arms instead. You're home, she said. Then she whispered the same words someone once told her, years ago, in a storm, with her back against a barn wall and her life falling apart. You're not alone. Not anymore. The gate stayed open, and the land listened. Because in a world full of power, money, and fear, there was now a place where none of that mattered. Only life, and what you do with it once it's finally yours. The sky burned with the last orange breath of the day. A windless silence hovered over the prairie fields, as if time itself had paused to watch what was about to unfold. Midnight lay in the tall grass, his body half lit by the amber light. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't restless. He was still, unnaturally still, not from pain, from peace. Children sat around him, forming a circle with their knees touching. No one spoke. Some were too young to understand what was happening. Others understood too well. One of the older girls, Amelia, kept whispering something to the foal beside her, trying to keep it calm. But it wasn't the foal that was afraid. It was her. Hope stood a few feet back, holding Lucas's old guitar. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Lucas approached quietly. Are you sure? He asked. Hope nodded. He waited until they were all here. Lucas looked around. Survivors. Runaways. Children once too afraid to speak. They were all there. Every one of them. Drawn not by obligation, but by something deeper. Something they couldn't name. Hope knelt beside Midnight, placing her hand gently on his flank. I was dying the day I met him, she said aloud. Not to anyone in particular. Not on the outside. But inside, I was already gone. A little boy, barefoot and hugging his knees, leaned forward. What did he do? Hope's voice cracked. He stood still and let me scream. Lucas stepped forward and laid the guitar down beside Midnight's head. The same guitar that once played a lullaby in a broken stall. The one Hope had sung with her ribs bruised and her hope shattered. And then, without announcement, the wind changed. The tall grass moved as if stirred by breath. Midnight exhaled, one last deep sigh. Then nothing. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Just stillness. The little boy began to cry. And suddenly, so did others. But it wasn't sadness that filled the air. It was something else. Something strange. Like a release. Like a secret finally shared. Then came the twist no one expected. Lucas took a step back, knees buckling. He grabbed the back of his neck as if he'd been struck. It's gone, he whispered. Hope turned to him. What is? The sound, he said, eyes wide. The sound he carried, it's not here anymore. At first, no one understood. But Lucas had always felt something others hadn't. A hum, a low vibration in the earth when midnight walked, when he ran, when he simply stood. Like the animal carried something ancient, something beyond muscle and breath. Now that hum was gone. Completely. I thought he was just a horse, Lucas muttered. You never believed that, Hope replied. And she was right. Because in that moment, something happened. The youngest child, the one barely old enough to walk, stood and wandered over to Midnight's head. He reached out, unafraid, and touched the animal's eye. A flicker, a flash, but not in the body of the horse. In the sky, a beam, short and narrow, broke through the clouds in a single line, illuminating the circle where the children sat. No one moved. Even the animals nearby froze. The birds didn't sing. The grass held its breath. Lucas turned to Hope. What was he? Hope looked down at the still body. Something we weren't ready to understand. Then came the second twist. A man stepped forward from the tree line. Someone none of them recognized. He wore a silver BOLO tie and carried a folded envelope in his hand. He didn't speak. He simply handed the letter to Hope. It was addressed to her, in Ethan's handwriting. Hope opened it slowly. Inside was 5 words. He wasn't supposed to die. Her hand shook. The man cleared his throat. I'm Dr. Alan Reese. I was the head vet on Ethan Whitmore's private genetic program. Everyone froze. Midnight, he continued, was part of something larger. Something Ethan began decades ago. A line of horses bred, not for profit, but for empathy. He paused. We discovered they respond to human pain in a measurable frequency. Their heart rhythms sync. Their cortisol levels drop. They can detect emotional distress from over 30 feet away, like therapy animals. Lucas asked. No, Dr. Reese replied. Like mirrors. Hope stared at Midnight's body. He chose to die, she said. Dr. Reese nodded. And now, others are coming. Horses like him. They've been released. Ethan's final order. Another silence. A new chapter beginning. Hope looked at the children, then at Lucas, then at the sky. We build more stalls, she said. Why? Asked Amelia. Hope ran her hand along Midnight's mane. Because the next ones will need us, the same way we once needed him. And with that, she closed Midnight's eyes for the last time. Not with grief, but with thanks. It started with one voice. Soft, shaky, almost afraid to be heard. A little girl, no more than 6, stood alone beneath the sprawling oak in the middle of the yard, where hay dust shimmered like gold in the afternoon sun. She closed her eyes and sang a single line, the same one Hope used to hum when the world felt like too much. Sleep, my little one, the world will wait. No one had taught it to her. She had never heard Hope sing. Hope was gone, yet the melody had found her. By the second verse, another voice joined, then another, until 24 children, some barefoot, others in borrowed boots, some scarred by what they'd lived through, others too small to remember, were singing in unison. No instruments, just their voices rising together in a rhythm that didn't belong to any language or tradition. It belonged only to the wounded, and the ones who had once been. The wind picked up, not violent, but steady, like a hand sliding across a piano key. And that's when something changed. From the top window of the house, Lucas stood frozen. He had just come from cataloging new arrivals. 3 horses, a dog with 1 ear, and a woman who hadn't spoken since she'd arrived. Paperwork in hand, he'd looked out and expected to see the usual chaos of kids running, chores undone, animals loose. Instead, he saw stillness, not the absence of noise, the presence of something bigger. He recognized the melody, but not from Hope, from himself. He had sung it once, long ago, before he understood why it hurt to breathe sometimes, before he knew what his mother had carried, before he knew about the night she had been left with nothing but a name and a wild horse with eyes like thunder. He dropped the papers and ran, out the door, down the porch, into the circle of voices, and suddenly, without warning or explanation, they all stopped singing, not out of fear, as if they'd heard something. Lucas turned to where they were all looking. The wind had shifted directions. It now came from the west, where no wind ever came. From the woods. From the place where midnight had been buried. And then came the first twist. A low, distinct note echoed across the yard. Lucas spun around. Did anyone else hear that? Several kids nodded. But there was no horse. Not a shadow. Not a print. Just a sound. Hope's lullaby. The one they'd been singing. Carried by the wind in reverse. Backwards. Like a memory being reeled in. That night, when the children had all gone to sleep and the stars hung heavier than usual, Lucas sat alone near the stables. The lullaby kept looping in his head, but there were no words. Only a rhythm. That's when he heard the gate click open behind him. He stood up fast, expecting one of the staff. It was Ethan's attorney. He hadn't been seen in months. He looked older, worn. "I shouldn't be here," the man said. "But you need to know." "Know what?" "There was one more file. Ethan had it sealed. Not even the lab knew." Lucas said nothing. The man handed him a USB drive. "I didn't open it, but he left a note. Give this to Lucas. Only when the lullaby returns." Lucas took the drive and stared at it for what felt like hours. When he finally plugged it in, what he found wasn't a report. It was a recording. Not of data. Of Hope. Her voice. From years ago. She wasn't singing. She was speaking. To him. "If you're hearing this," she said, "I didn't survive what came next. But if the lullaby is back, then something did. Something more powerful than me. Then you. Then Ethan. Then pain." She paused. "I didn't invent that melody. Midnight didn't either. It came with the land. With the wind. With whatever lives here that we can't see." Lucas felt his chest tighten. "I was just the first to remember," she continued. "You were the first to carry it forward. But someone else, someone much smaller, will be the first to set it free." Static. Then silence. Lucas turned off the computer and walked outside. The wind had picked up again. But it wasn't just wind. It was the melody, buried in the trees, in the fences, in the very boards of the barn. The children had stopped singing, but the ranch hadn't. The ranch remembered. From the shadows near the stalls, the youngest child, the one born after Hope died, sat rocking back and forth, humming, alone, the same melody, perfect pitch, eyes closed, as if she was hearing something no one else could. Lucas didn't interrupt her. He walked to the pasture and leaned against the fence. He let the sound carry. For the first time, he understood. This place didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to every broken song that had ever been healed here, to every cry that had been heard, to every whisper that had found its echo. Hope hadn't left anything behind. She had become the wind, and now the wind would never stop singing. The first copy arrived without warning. No press release, no influencer campaign, just a brown cardboard box sitting on the front steps of an old bookstore in Helena, Montana. It was snowing lightly that morning, enough to hush the world, but not enough to cover the bold, stamped letters on the package. Hope, advance author copy. For your window. The owner, Rick Masters, a Vietnam vet who'd never cried since '73. Opened the book, flipped to a page at random, read 2 lines, and had to sit down. He didn't sell a single other book that day. Customers came in, saw him holding it, and waited their turn like it was sacred. No one knew who the author was. It just said, "By Hope Walker, as remembered by the land." That's how it began. Within 3 weeks, bookstores across the country started receiving their own unsolicited packages. In New Orleans, a Black-owned bookshop taped pages to their windows. In Flagstaff, an Apache librarian read it aloud over local radio. In Boston, a Catholic school canceled theology class to discuss Chapter 6. People didn't ask who wrote it anymore. They asked why it felt like it had been written for them. Because it didn't read like a memoir or a biography. It read like a confessional with no shame, a howl that refused to be silenced. It spoke of loss in a way that didn't beg for pity, only recognition. It spoke of a wild horse named Midnight who wasn't tamed, but trusted. Of land once used to crush the vulnerable, now turned into sanctuary. Of a woman who didn't beg to be seen, but made it impossible not to be. The chapters weren't numbered. Each one was a name. Anna, Sophia, Lisbeth, Riley, Janae. Each name told the story of someone Hope had met, helped, buried, or loved. Some were real, some were metaphors, some were readers themselves. The twist came when a journalist from The Atlantic tried to debunk the book. He traveled to Texas, expecting to find a broken-down shelter and a few embellished survivors. Instead, he found Campo de Vida, fully functioning, self-sustaining, and led not by a man, but by a 12-year-old girl who quoted Supreme Court rulings better than most senators. She left everything to us, the girl said. Not just the land, the truth. The journalist didn't publish his article. He dropped out of the industry and stayed to work the stables. Then came the national controversy. Texas's Board of Education voted unanimously to include Hope as required reading for all ninth graders. Within hours, opposition flooded social media. She was a runaway. She was mentally unstable. She stole private land. She glorified criminals. But none of that stuck, because the book never asked to be defended. It asked to be heard. And the people who had once been silent, women, teens, immigrants, ex-cons, widows, veterans that didn't fight back, they read out loud. In subway cars, in church basements, in prison courtyards, until the noise couldn't drown it anymore. That's when Harvard stepped in. A professor of moral philosophy, herself a trauma survivor, announced a new seminar. Radical Compassion in the Age of Collapse, a case study of Hope Walker. Enrollment sold out in 4 minutes. In a televised interview, when asked why she centered the entire course on someone with no academic background, she answered, "Because no textbook ever held my hand the way her story did." But the most shocking twist came 6 months after the book's release. A man in his 60s stood outside the Library of Congress during a live reading. He wore a press suit and a ring on his right hand. He waited until the cameras left, then approached the podium during cleanup. He placed a worn-out photograph of a woman holding a newborn horse beside the microphone. Then he spoke. "I'm the reason she almost didn't survive," he said. "My name is Ethan Whitmore." Gasps. But no cameras, no headlines, only witnesses. He continued, "I thought power came from control. I thought land made me strong. That horse, Midnight, taught me otherwise. Hope didn't ask me to confess, but I can't live free while the world remembers her as an angel. She was fire, and I was the gasoline, and I pray the blaze never goes out." No one clapped. No one interrupted. They just let the truth sit there, raw, heavy, beautiful. Months later, a new edition of the book was released. It had a single edition, a postscript. "This story is not mine. It belongs to every woman who thought her silence made her invisible, to every child who learned to speak through animals, to every man who thought love was weakness and learned, too late, that it was armor." If you're holding this book, you are already part of it. At the very last page, in delicate script, it read, "Sleep, my little one. The world will wait." And just like that, it became more than a story. It became memory. It became gospel. It became ours. The morning sky was streaked with burnt orange and deep indigo. Not the kind that calls for awe, but the kind that asks for silence. Hope stood alone beneath the crooked mesquite tree, leaning slightly on a walking cane made from Midnight's old reins, now smoothed by years of use. She didn't wear black. She hated what it meant. Instead, she wore the same faded denim shirt she'd worn the day she first arrived at the ranch, still stitched at the elbows, still smelling faintly of hay and sweat, and some memory that refused to fade. Behind her, laughter broke like sunlight through fog. Children, dozens of them, ran barefoot through the paddocks, weaving between small horses and clapping wooden sticks in rhythm. The fence posts were covered in colorful ribbons, each one tied by a child who had once been too afraid to speak. Now they sang, loudly, off-key, fearlessly. At the center of them stood Lucas, her son, now a man of 20, with hands as strong as hers once were, and a voice that carried more than commands. It carried belief. He held a worn leather notebook in one hand and gestured to a small girl with hair the color of midnight. "No, not like that," Lucas called out. "Don't force him. Let him come to you." The girl hesitated, then lowered her stick. The young Mustang stepped forward on its own. Hope's chest tightened. Not from illness. That battle had come and gone. But from something else. The ache of witnessing time move without asking permission. A woman approached from behind. Not a nurse. Not a helper. Just a woman. She handed Hope a cup of black coffee. Bitter. No sugar. No cream. "You raised a good man," she said. Hope didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched Lucas kneel before the little girl, place the reins gently in her hand, and whisper something into her ear. The girl beamed. "I didn't raise him," Hope finally said. "He raised me." The woman smiled. Then came the first twist. A black car parked near the edge of the gravel road. From it emerged Evelyn Dorsey, head of the Texas Family Commission. She hadn't stepped foot on the ranch since her failed attempt to shut it down a decade earlier. Hope didn't flinch. She didn't ask questions. Evelyn walked slowly toward her, carrying a thick envelope. "They want to name it a historic site," she said, without ceremony. Hope blinked. "That's supposed to mean something to me." "It means they can't tear it down," Evelyn answered. "Not even if someone tries again." She handed the envelope to Hope. "I didn't come here to apologize," Evelyn continued. "I came here because my granddaughter is here. Her name's Junie. She sings louder than the rest." Hope stared at her. Unreadable. "Funny," she said at last. "You try to shut this place down, and now you're part of it." "I know." Evelyn turned and walked away. The second twist came 3 days later. A letter arrived from a prison in Huntsville. It was signed only Thomas W., the former officer who had once dragged Hope from a gas station bathroom and laughed as her wrist bled from the cuffs. He was dying of cancer. The letter detailed how he had read Hope, the book, under fluorescent lights and realized he'd never once called his daughter by her name. He included a check, everything he had left. Hope didn't cash it. She donated it anonymously to a horse therapy program for veterans. And the final twist? Hope called Lucas to the barn that night. She walked him past the old tools, past the feed buckets, past the broken halter that no one ever dared to throw away. Then she pointed to the far stall, the one with the initials M+H carved into the beam. Lucas hesitated. Hope didn't speak. She only opened the stall door. Inside stood a young black colt with a white star on his forehead. Calm, still, watching. Lucas looked back at his mother. When Hope's eyes glistened. After midnight passed, I thought the chapter was closed. She stepped forward, knelt with effort, and kissed the colt's nose. But I forgot, she said. Some stories don't end. They change forms. Lucas crouched beside her. He's yours now, Hope whispered. Name him what you want, but don't tame him. Learn from him. Lucas swallowed hard. I'll call him. Whisper. Hope grinned. Then she stood, slower this time, and walked out into the rising sun, cane in one hand, book in the other. As she passed the open field, the children had gathered again, hands linked, singing softly. Sleep, my little one. The world will wait. Hope closed her eyes, not in sadness, but in recognition. The miracle was never in riding a horse. It was in listening to the pain and answering it with love. And as long as someone, anyone, remembered that, the story would never end. Before you go, take a breath. Just one. What if this story wasn't just about Hope or Lucas? What if in some quiet way, it was also about you? Maybe there's a part of your life you've been trying to heal. Maybe there's a voice inside you've been trying to silence. Maybe you've been carrying something heavy that no one else sees. Let me ask you, what would change in your life if you stopped running from the pain and started listening to it? Who could you become if you gave yourself the same compassion you give to others? These aren't just questions. They're doors. And sometimes, all it takes is a story like this to open one. Drop a comment below. Tell us what moved you, what you saw in Hope's eyes, or what moment hit you hardest. Your voice matters here, more than you know. If this story left a mark on you, send it to someone you love. Don't wait. You never know whose heart might heal. And if you want more stories that go deeper than the surface, stories that mean something, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us. Because this isn't just a channel. It's a place for people who feel deeply, who want more, and who believe in second chances. You're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, this is where your next